So person after person goes up to this microphone, and their questions are not about all the typical things that would ask. It's all about health. And they're saying things like, I've had my thyroid removed, I've had prostate cancer, my wife is fighting kidney cancer, my kid has this, could it be the water? Now, there isn't a State Department anywhere in the world that's going to look you in the eye and say, yes, it's the water. One gentleman actually came up and said, he looked to be maybe mid-30s. He said, my wife is pregnant with her first child. Should she be drinking the water? He was told the water was safe to consume.
Welcome back to National Champion Radio, the show that honors U.S. citizens who have won the world's most prestigious prizes. Today, we're honored to speak with Laurene Allen, the 2025 North American recipient of the Goldman Environmental Prize, a $200,000 award that recognizes ordinary people who take extraordinary action to protect our planet. When one of the largest environmental crises in New England's history was exposed in her own community, Laurene Allen stepped up to protect thousands of families affected by contaminated drinking water. Her campaign took on Saint-Gobain Performance Plastics plant, which was responsible for releasing toxic, forever chemicals known as PFAS into local air and water systems. Laurene gives us a sterling example of how to truly bring about change against powerful entities in modern times. She went well beyond simple protests and campaign slogans on social media. First, she co-created a community organization, Merrimack Citizens for Clean Water. They partnered with university scientists to test contamination. They built alliances with other national organizations. They even ran political campaigns for multiple members of the organization, where they won office and created change from inside the system. After nearly a decade of relentless advocacy, their fight led to a major victory when in 2024, Saint-Gobain shut down their New England operations. While the fight against forever chemicals continues, Laurene's win shows us how to exercise our power as we the people and defeat a multi-billion-dollar corporation in our own backyards. She shows how one powerful and persistent individual can be a model for us all.
And with that, we are very honored to welcome Laurene Allen to National Champion Radio. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute honor to welcome you to National Champion Radio. So we're so honored to have you on, and your work, maybe you can, we've done a little intro, but maybe you can really start to lay the groundwork of this Goldman Prize that you won and the journey. This was a very long journey to the Goldman Prize. It takes a lot of work, and I know we're going to break down all the details along the way on this journey, but maybe you can take people back to where it first started and what got you to say, okay, social work, yeah, I'm doing that, but I need to take, my attention to this matter and really go all in.
Well, I've been very environmentally conscious my whole life. And yes, I was a full-time clinical social worker. I'm about a three-quarter-time clinical social worker now. And I learned in March of 2016 that the water I believed to be safe, that I raised my kids on and watered what I believed was an organic garden, and we drank plentiful from that tap, or water in New Hampshire, actually received the best tasting groundwater award for year after year after year. So that's a head game. You're saying, my gosh, how can that be? So these are tasteless, odorless chemicals that are in the environment all over the nation, all over the world. So we were told that 2 of the 6 public wells that we drink from were testing above a health advisory at that point, which was way too high. The health advisory was 100 parts. Just for a point of reference, the current law of the land is 4 parts, and that's parts per trillion for nerdy people. And they were looking at PFOA, which is the main component in Teflon alone, not the slew of other chemicals in the same class that are just as harmful. So very, very troubling. So they had this information meeting where, the public turned out, standing room only, And that day I had a long clinical schedule, so I thought, I'll watch it on Merrimack TV. So I came home, put on the cable channel. My husband and I were watching it, and the room was immensely packed in the gym. It was a big room, and it was full of people, standing room only, as I said before. So how they proceeded is the Department of Environmental Services was giving an overlay of what people could expect from their investigation. So they basically said 2 public wells are closed, and there's about 13 private wells in the northeast corner of my town that are going to be, given bottled water, and some other homes across the river in another town called Litchfield. So I had this feeling that it was really trying to be contained to a small geographical area, and I thought to myself, wait a second, the drinking water that we're talking about here is groundwater. Groundwater is all connected. A well does not exist, with a cistern, it's groundwater. So is it going to stop, after 13 wells? So that was my first thought. Something that was kind of funny at that meeting is when they got to the health side of it, they basically said these are emerging contaminants. We can't connect exposure and outcome. Not much is known. All this kind of stuff that wasn't helpful. Before they started that part of the presentation, my husband, who was born in 1955, was watching the show. He's not up on technology at all. He doesn't use it. And he says to me, "Oh, wow, remember when you were in history class years ago and you saw the overhead projector with the microfiche?" And under a certain age, people aren't going to know what I'm talking about here, but older people will get it when I say this. And he said, and then you saw that 3M envelope in the logo and you knew it was going to be a boring class and you went to sleep. And I was like, what are you talking about? That was microfiche. This is PowerPoint. Geez, you were really born in 1955, weren't you? I was born in 1962, so I knew a little bit more. So I'm like, shh, be quiet, be quiet. So on they go with the presentation, not presenting results that we see in films like Dark Water and other films and books that talk about what's called the C8 study, which does show the harm of these chemicals in vast populations of people. So they really gloss over, the harm to humans, and it wasn't at all satisfying. And something about those slides just didn't feel right to me. As a person and also as a clinician, something was really lacking. So people then got up to ask questions. Usually people in New England want to know, are we going to be paying for this? How much is it going to cost? They want to know the technical nuts and bolts, and they don't talk about themselves, especially the guys, they're older New Englanders and younger New Englanders, and when you ask how they're doing, they say they're fine, regardless of how they are really doing. So person after person goes up to this microphone, and their questions are not about all the typical things they would ask. It's all about health. And they're saying things like, I've had my thyroid removed, I've had prostate cancer, my wife is fighting kidney cancer, my kid has this, could it be the water? Now, there isn't a State Department anywhere in the world that's going to look you in the eye and say, yes, it's the water, and implicate a responsible party. They can't do that. But basically, they just said over and over and over, we can't connect exposure and outcome, not much is known about these chemicals. So a pattern is emerging to me. I pick up my phone and I just Google PFOA in thyroid, because he mentioned thyroid, PFOA in kidneys, and I see a slew of information from the National Institute of Health and this huge C8 study, which had 80,000 participants. So I look at this stuff and I think to myself, that is a valid sample, and something is not right here. One gentleman actually came up and said, he looked to be maybe mid-30s. He said, my wife is pregnant with her first child. Should she be drinking the water? He was told the water was safe to consume. And all these alarms are going off in my head. I'm hearing what people are saying. I know what I'm looking at in less than 5 minutes on a phone, and I'm thinking, what is going on here? If I can find this information so quickly, the state surely must know more than I do. So people are leaving the microphone and going back to their seats, and what I'm seeing is, because I'm watching this on television, in my living room, so I kind of have this view that I think I would have felt the same in the room, but I'm looking at the scene basically, right? And I'm watching people and their body language, and they're all leaving the microphone and they're broken and depleted, and no one's answer is satisfactory, and there's no precautionary principle. Even if you want to say, well, we don't really know, we're at the beginning stage of this, but be cautious. Maybe you want to be careful and protect yourselves. That's what we do. Here's an example of precautionary principle that's a simple one. Back in late 1986, I'm pregnant with my first child. I had just moved to New Hampshire, drinking lots of water. And I asked my physician, my OBGYN, I said, oh, geez, I drink Diet Coke. Is that safe in pregnancy? He said, there really isn't much research, but maybe as a precautionary principle, you want to lay off the Diet Coke. So I gave up Diet Coke for my future unborn first daughter, and also, for the second one, a few years later, and then limited it to a can a day, because I thought, better watch this stuff just in case.
Yeah.
So the research wasn't there, the science wasn't there. He couldn't say to me definitively, don't drink it, it will be bad for the fetus, but he said, probably a good idea just to leave it be, because there's a lot we don't know. That approach was not being taken. So that was number one that pulled in a sense of outrage with me. It was the people and the harm that I could see, and what I just knew in my gut was true, and then this immense sense of justice over, what is going on here? They're going to get away with who knows what. The state is praising Saint-Gobain at this meeting, by the way, and they're saying, oh, they're really cooperative. They've been great to work with. And 3 times in this meeting, you praise a polluter. What's up with that? So that was my first entry to this, and my first, a general overview of how I felt that first night in March of 2016.
Wow. And so, this huge polluter, they come in, they're making these plastics, and the people of the town are starting to see adverse health effects. They're saying, oh my God, this is happening.
Long-term,
like huge, right? So long-term health effects. And they're saying, could it be the water? And instead of saying maybe, they say, of course not. Don't look here. This is the greatest water ever. This is the greatest company. They're the best on
They're
pollution.
good neighbors, and they claim to be environmental stewards. Here's a kicker. We just finished Climate Week New York last week, and I was there for the first day of it. One of the sponsors of Climate Week is Saint-Gobain, trying to uphold their reputation of being an environmental steward for shareholders, because they know there's an immense market move right now to sustainable investing and ethical investing, right? There's a lot of money out there that really wants to invest in clean, healthy things. Another thing at that meeting is people were talking about the air. One medical practice across the street, not too far from there, talked about odors and air emissions, and people who lived in that area of town said, we've been calling and inquiring about air emissions for years. What can you tell us about the air? And they said, that really doesn't seem to be a pathway. So they keep the focus on drinking water over 100 parts for only one of these compounds. They minimize and basically deny air exposure. And I'm thinking to myself, what about, dust, and what about the contamination for miles, in homes and outside of homes and on the soil? So my brain is going to all of that. Then my brain goes even further, and it says, oh my gosh, we have a wastewater facility in our town that makes compost, and it goes out all over New England for using on sport fields, lawns, and hopefully not food grade. But it didn't used to be. Turns out they kind of remarketed it, and it was now considered food grade. So I'm thinking, whoa, where is their, draining and sewer system, impacts from Saint-Gobain? It's going to the wastewater facility, whatever they're flushing down drains and emitting, discharging. So the interesting thing is 13 air stacks on this facility, not filtered in any way, shape, or form.
No.
So, so here we have, so when we talk about, now they're called Saint-Gobain Performance Plastics. At that point, they were simply called Saint-Gobain. What happened is they were transitioning from a PFOA-based to Gen X, which is made at Chemours in North Carolina. Bad news, it's not safer. And the industry playbook right now is to tell everybody that something called PTFE is safer, and it's not a PFAS. So you'll see this in pans. You'll see PFAS-free pans that are ceramic technology. Then you'll see certain cookware, including Tefal and Rachel Ray cookware, and I'm specifically naming them because they can do the right thing and move their technology over to ceramic. It will say on those pans and boxes that they are PTFE, and they're claiming that PTFE is safe, it's a fluoropolymer, and it's not PFAS. That's a blatant lie. I'm not blaming someone like Rachel Ray. I'm saying that whatever she's being told by her advisors and whoever the manufacturers are that her name is on, I would plea for her to do her own research and not just trust, what they're saying, because it isn't true. So Saint-Gobain, the contamination is everywhere from what they call the legacy PFAS, PFOA in particular. They've been blending in the newer compounds that are shorter chain and supposedly safer, but they really aren't. So the investigation stays focused on the old stuff, and it's everywhere. Our town has 29,000 people in it. The small area in the northeast corner of town over the years, with people urging each other to test their wells, has grown to 9 communities. 9 communities. So this is the largest contamination site and investigation in the history of New England, not only New Hampshire. That is staggering, and we have nothing close to polluter accountability and nothing close to justice.
We're talking about the largest contamination in the history of New England, yet there's no justice. There's, Saint-Gobain has not had anything really come to them. Of course, the great part of the story is you did get them to close down, which is amazing, and congratulations on that. Yet there was no fines, no. They didn't even have to say that the water was linked to them, that the problems with the contamination was clearly this massive plant producing contaminating chemicals. Of course, that didn't even get linked to them in the final analysis. So before we get too far downstream or upstream, maybe we take it back to what are these chemicals? People have heard of them, perhaps, maybe not. These forever chemicals, the problems that they cause in people, and the widespread, ubiquitous nature. They're everywhere. Maybe you can talk about, they're essentially like Teflon.
Yes.
So maybe on a basic level, we can talk about what these forever chemicals are and why they're such a huge problem.
So commonly used, my polluter used it for fabric coating. They had fabrics, and ironically, the bulk of their profits, the first 5 years of this investigation, they had $94 billion in profits, this one facility, from primarily Department of Defense contracts. So before I get into what it is and where it's found, it's important to realize that they are profiting immensely from public dollars, right? They were never fined. They never shut down for a day. They're running 3 shifts round the clock. They're running their systems too fast, too hot to increase their profits. And it's on our dime, or cleanup is at our cost. And you're right, they never acknowledge it. They made statements like, oh, these chemicals are found everywhere, and there's a lot of other industries that use them. Our state repeatedly has said to them, well, go ahead and name, the other co-responsible parties, and we'll look at them. And they never did come up with names. And if there were, our state would have said, yes, it's shared responsibility. So from a consumer perspective, though, there are some good things that we can do and be aware of. These are the one thing that caught my eye in the very beginning. I knew about Teflon pans. Teflon pans are bad news. They let off fumes, they off gas, and not only the impact to you and air quality and what you inhale, because what you inhale from fumes is very, very harmful. It's absorbed with your body, and your body can't excrete these chemicals. They're called forever chemicals, not only because they don't break down in the environment, because they stay in your organs, not just your bloodstream, and they are the most persistent endocrine disruptors, which means your endocrine system is what keeps every other organ healthy, and it's going to protect you from disease. And they're just bad news. They don't belong in our body. The one low-lying fruit that caught my eye in the beginning that everybody probably has had is microwave popcorn. And I was like, ooh, who hasn't had microwave popcorn? It's a healthier snack, right? Zap it in the microwave and sit down and watch a movie. Those wrappers are full of PFAS, and you will be eating toxic chemicals, which you won't even know, with your delicious popcorn. So where are they as an industry in terms of looking at substitute coatings? I haven't looked recently. In the beginning of this, some work had to be done. Food wrappers, anything that's grease and water resistant. So if you buy fast food, or if you go into a store and you have food to go, if you come home and that little clamshell is looking real good after you finish your meal out of it, you shouldn't be putting your food in that, right? So I'm seeing signs everywhere in food packaging. One example was I grabbed a salad to go at a supermarket in Maine this weekend, where I was up in Maine, and it was in good old-fashioned cardboard, no dressing in there so it could stay fresh, and it was not coated with anything. And I was like, yes, because that's also compostable. So that's what we need to do. The plastics that you see are fluorinated plastics, PFAS, right? Cosmetics, clothes, footwear that's water repellent. Many, many manufacturers such as Patagonia, Keen Footwear have really led the way. Home Depot and Lowe's 3 or 4 years ago said that they were absolutely phasing out Stainmaster carpeting and anything that had PFAS added aftermarket or during production. The manufacturing of carpets, right? That happens a lot in Georgia and South Carolina. What do you think is going on down there? Not a lot of attention to PFAS, looking the other way. There's some carpet and textile manufacturers in that area that are doing immense harm to water, air, soil, and people's health. So cosmetics, even high performance sport wear, right? We used to wear mostly cotton when I was growing up, and now what you see is synthetics. So not necessarily all the polyesters, but some of it, you have to really think about it. If it's moisture wicking and sweat repelling, just here's the thing. If you wear something, and you rinse it under the sink and you see water beating up and rolling off of that sucker, don't use it. Stop and think, ask questions, because there's no label that says what's in your fabrics, right? So a lot of plastics are supposedly recycled and turned into textiles. Well, this is not only bad news for the receivers and the consumers, and the landfills where they end up, that's going to further leach into the ground, or the incinerators that's going to be poisoning someone's air. It's also, where are these things made, right? If you look at a Teflon pan and you say, well, I don't think it's that bad. I used it on low heat for a couple of minutes, scrambled my egg and washed the thing. Should be okay. Well, where is that pan made, and what is the process to coat that metal, right? And what's emitting from the smokestacks from that particular manufacturer? We haven't looked at that. We really haven't focused on stopping the sources and looking at, where these products are being made and what's going into the environment and all the people that are frontline communities in all of these facilities. So on and on and on it goes, with cosmetics, the cosmetic industry, do people need waterproof mascara? They don't. You really, really don't. So if consumers kind of look at their products and say, what can I do without, or what can I say I think that could be made in a safer way? And you pull together other people, we do have people power, and we can say no to things. One of the biggest travesties in my last 9.5 years is watching a polluter, drop off mountains of bottled water outside people's homes. And this investigation has grown and grown and grown. Hundreds of people with private wells, thousands, because there's many more still on the list that they haven't accepted responsibility for. So when you're drinking water from plastics, we hear a lot about microplastics these days, which is a very good thing for people to know about. But those are also fluorinated. You're also getting PFAS from the plastic. The water is probably fine, but because the water is packaged, just like a lot of food products, the product is fine, but it's in a container that's creating contamination. Pesticides, lawn fertilizers full of PFAS. So we have we have this stuff everywhere. It's coming at us. It's a global problem. The UK is grappling with many, many discoveries right now. And I'm hearing the stories from communities who are sounding a lot like my community and what they're trying to do and what they want. And when people learn about these chemicals, they don't want them in their life and they don't want them in their bodies. Let's talk about little ones, right? When you look at babies, right? They're spitting up. They're not the neatest creatures in the world. I have my first grandchild. She's 11 months old. And, we really looked at, what standards to buy for the gear that comes with babies. If you buy a car seat, it's got fabric in it, right? So I think once upon a time they thought, oh, this is great. If we can sell fabric that if the baby is drooly or spitty or something spills, boom, a quick wipe and it's clean. Just like couches, that are stain resistant. And, families really go for this stuff. Playpens, backpacks for babies, all of this stuff. We know about mattresses, and people do pay attention to mattresses off-gassing, but when we look at what fabrics we're using around babies in car seats and all the gear, it has to change. And people have to know, what's in that fabric, and they have to stop and think about if it doesn't behave naturally, there's a chemical that allowed that to happen.
How did these things become so ubiquitous in manufacturing?
Yeah.
The process of them all, and
Yes.
when did that happen? And
Well,
why is it the
there's
standard
a
now?
lot of books written on this, and there's books and articles. Investigative journalists have written on that, going back to the Manhattan Project, and that's about the time in history. So by 1940, these things were invented. So the Department of Defense needed certain things to behave a certain way. And they were looking at, nuclear bombs and all kinds of things going on in the 30s and 40s. And they had we still do have this partnership between industry and defense, right? This huge industrial complex, if you will. And so they invented, a chemist invented, this chemical supposedly by mistake, and then they looked at the properties and they said, ooh, there's things that we can do with this. So after they fulfilled whatever they were doing with the Department of Defense, and, we only know some of the story, we never know all the story, they proceeded to say, hey, we can patent this and it has, we can market it. We can do all kinds of things here that will be convenient for people. So they started putting it in everything. Oh, we could use it for this. We could use it for that. Even, like car washes, right? Years ago, it was turtle wax. Now you go through a car wash and for $2 or $4 extra, you can have Teflon coating in your car wash. Come on, firefighting foam that people used to play in, and firefighters used to have old home days and let everybody slip and slide of it. Highly, highly toxic chemicals, PFAS in that stuff. The gear that the firefighters wear, those suits that are made by companies like Saint-Gobain who coat high-performance fabrics. That's what high-performance fabrics means. They're covered in PFAS. They're dermally absorbed. And look at firefighters, for an example. When you are out there fighting a fire, it's hot, right? So what happens when it's hot or pores open? What do we have in firefighters at very, very young age? In their 30s, we see prostate cancer, big time. That is not normal. 30-year-olds do not get cancers like this. Well, think about this. Where is your gear, going to be absorbed? Also, high levels of breast cancer in firefighters. We don't hear that talked about very much because it doesn't sound manly. Yes, there are female firefighters, but the majority are men. Men can get breast cancer. It's not just for women. So it's a lot of stuff that, people are not aware of. And there's been this major effort for decades, to keep exposure and outcome disconnected. The manufacturers have known for decades that these are harmful. In Discovery, in New York, the same polluter, Saint-Gobain, all kinds of stuff was pulled out from them alone, knowing the harm. And in cases against DuPont and 3M, the original manufacturers of these chemicals, lots of stuff has been there over and over and over. We see it in movies. And I want to give a shout out to one book in particular. There are many books on this topic. And there is one that, how can I say it's my favorite book when it's such a horrible situation, right? It's called They Poisoned the World by Mariah Blake. What I love about this book is it's readable. It's readable, and it tells the story of Hoosick Falls, New York. All the folks in that book I know so well because we share a polluter. And through their stories, she goes back in history too and talks about the creation of these chemicals. There are a lot of footnotes in this book, but if you're not into footnotes, ignore them because it flows as a story and you really, really absorb it. She is a gifted writer that can tell something in a way that we can, it's like a page turner, right? But it's real. Every bit of it is real. So it's a phenomenal book, and I think it's the best I've read on this subject.
Wow, Mariah Blake, They Poisoned the World.
Yes.
And so, taking it back to why you won the Goldman Prize, firstly, maybe we can just touch on what it meant for you to win the Goldman Prize. Had you heard of the Goldman Prize before?
Yes,
I mean, this
I have.
show is all about, National Champion Radio. We celebrate U.S. citizens who've won these prizes, and they're really huge prizes in the field.
Oh my gosh.
if
I
you
still
know
can't
them.
even say it without going, right? And it's been almost a year since I knew. It's so heavily embargoed, right? They go through this, I found they went through this immense process of, you can't just nominate people for this. There's certain like secret people out there who are very high level in environmental work that they get to be the nominators, right? And then the nominators nominate based on who's caught their eye for a number of years. And then they go in research. By the time I met the folks affiliated and working for Goldman, they knew me so well. It was really quite a surreal experience to realize that they know everything. And then I guess there's a list. There's a list of finalists that they get looked at, and then they go through it and shorten the list. Then they go to the board and they discuss it and they make a selection. So it goes back, I think so there's one prize winner for each continent, and my award is for North America. I mean, that's mind-blowing. So the first recipient of the Goldman Prize, who I did know this, 20, 30, I don't know how many years ago, quite some time ago, was Lois Gibbs, right, for her work on Love Canal. So when I hear this phrase Goldman Prize, originally I just thought about Lois Gibbs. I don't put myself in the category of Lois Gibbs, but everybody I know is like, well, yeah, you are in that category. But, I'm just like, you got to do what you got to do, and never set out to be an activist. I've never set out to bring attention to myself. And my work, my work is facilitating change and supporting people in my office. What happens there is not only confidential by law, but, people leave and live their lives. So my work is never visible, other than advocating and trying to educate decision makers at times over certain things that are impacting people. But so when I learned about this was November of last year, and it was the week of the election. So the election comes and goes, right? I go to bed that night. I say, there's no point staying up and looking at results because this is going to be weeks. We're not going to know this immediately. So I get up the next morning. I don't even check in. And a friend of mine goes, oh my God, how could this have happened? And I go, what are you talking about? And then I look and I'm like, what? So aside from my concerns and my beliefs over everything, that this administration is trying to push at us, before I went to the broad implications, my automatic first thought was, oh my God, I can't go back to square one on this. I can't. And the reason I had that reaction was under the first Trump administration, I worked on federal policy. I co-founded the National PFAS Contamination Coalition in summer of 2017 at a conference in Boston, where I met a few people across the country who were impacted by PFAS with different situations. Mine was different from a lot of theirs, but I just thought to myself at that point, hold on a second, we're all going to be fighting these battles of our needs in our communities, and we're all at the mercy of our state and our state policies. Well, this is a federal issue. It still blows my mind under the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. how this could even have happened, right?
Yeah.
So we have this class of chemicals that are highly toxic and hazardous substances, yet somehow for decades they evaded being categorized as hazardous substances. I mean, that's mind-blowing, right? That's exactly what happened. So there I am, thinking I had worked under that administration, been to DC, engaged with the EPA. Scott Pruitt was the first EPA administrator under Donald Trump. Back then, he had agreed to host these listening sessions across the nation. The first one was held in New Hampshire for all of New England. I worked with some other advocates from other areas to organize that. So summer of 2018, there's Scott Pruitt, the EPA admin under Donald Trump, comes to New Hampshire, the first of these sessions with poster boards, tells us he's going to start rulemaking to federally legislate these and have water standards. Because in the beginning, my claim to them was, hey, this is crazy. Everybody's fighting the same battle as they learn about this. It's only the tip of the iceberg. And your access to clean water and safe water should not depend on your zip code and how far you get in your community and your state. This is a national issue, and this is a huge, huge elephant in the room. So promises were made about initiating this. They created something called the PFAS Action Plan that was launched in February of 2019. Turns out we call it the Inaction Plan because nothing made it over the finish line. Great stuff came out of the House at that point. They sponsored a lot of bills, and they sat in a pile on Mitch McConnell's desk. The Senate he never brought them to the floor. That's the way you can kill something easily. That's not checks and balance. So I did a lot of work on policy that first 4 years. And when Joe Biden was elected in the National Coalition, we put together a 22-point letter specifying it came out of the PFAS action plan and what we needed. And we engaged with his transitional team and said, this is huge. You're from Delaware. You know this. You know the makers, and this is non-negotiable. This is what we need. This is the biggest environmental issue ever. So we got some promises, and we worked, and we got the national water standards passed, and we got the hazardous substance designation that was missing for only a few of them, not all of them, but great progress. So after that election, I thought, I'm tired. How am I supposed to go back to square one? And now they're a step ahead because they know what we can do. So they're more, able to strategize to beat us. So I limped through that week, had a pretty depressing meeting with the state that Friday afternoon via Zoom. And that meeting ended, and I was just like wiped, ready to just crash end of the week. And a friend of mine who's a water commissioner on that call, immediately as we did, he texted me and he said, hey, you're going to get a call in about half an hour from a San Francisco zip code, area code. And he goes, I know you're probably not looking at your phone. Please answer the phone. He puts in all caps. It's very important. So my wit at that moment really, just down and as a person. You know what I text back to him? I say, San Francisco zip code. I'm like, what the heck is this? So I write back to him and I go, well, Nancy Pelosi better not be calling me because I'm not having it and I'm not happy with her right now. And he goes, ha ha ha, no, it's not her. And I go, so of course it wasn't Nancy Pelosi calling me, but that was my wit. And, I text my older daughter and I said, I'm getting this mysterious call from San Francisco. What's this about? I just want to put down my phone and go take a walk and drive up to Maine and walk on the beach, and I need to get out of here. And she says, why don't you record the call? Well, I didn't know how to record a call at that point. I go, how do you record a call? She's like, Mom, seriously? Everybody knows how to do that. And she goes, okay, get your iPad, plug it in, put it in front of you on the desk. Do you know where there's that voice memo app? I said, yes. So she says, hit that and put your phone on speaker because you'll have it in your stand because you do know how to do telehealth. Okay, great. So I recorded that 22-minute call. It came from a wonderful gentleman called David Corrado from the Goldman family prize, the Goldman Prize, and he broke the news to me, and I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. So it turned out over that summer, he had talked to my friend, Water Commissioner Don Provencher, who I never knew before PFAS. And he had talked to one of our state reps. He had talked to New Hampshire Sierra Club. He had talked to an activist down in, of all places, Nantucket, Mass. So I don't know how they find these folks as references, well-rounded reference. And the state rep that he talked to was of a different party affiliation that I am. So they really had these in-depth, and they were all sworn to secrecy. So they knew that day that I was going to be picked. Now it's embargoed till April. It doesn't get released till the ceremony on Earth Day. And so I could tell like family and no one else. So I had my favorite journalists, and I'm thinking, we're working on stuff and working on stories, and I'm going, ooh, I can't say anything to them. When they finally found out, they were, given a little bit of a heads up, but of course it was embargoed, and they were like, dang. So feeling just alone with that news, it was immense. And, then I hear a film crew's coming out there to spend 5 days with me, the beginning of January. It was really, really cold. And I'm not a camera person, video.
You're gonna fool me.
I'm like, oh, la, la, la. So David was wonderful. I said, oh my God. I said, the hardest part about, and then he goes, yeah, and after that, a photographer's going to come and we want certain pictures of you. And I'm like, seriously? Oh, I said, I make faces like, rah, when I'm talking, I can't, it's not going to go well. And so he laughed. I said, the hardest part of all this is that. So the video team was astonishing. But what happened is 5 days of footage to make the film that's on the Goldman website. I didn't see it till 2 days before the ceremony at the home in San Francisco Bay of one of the Goldman family members. Just astonishing. All the prize winners are there for this wonderful dinner, and then we see our film. So the first thing I notice in my film is this teeny little cameo appearance by my, at that point, deceased dachshund, Theo, he loved the film crew. He's like, I'm going to be in these pictures. I'm walking across the yard. He passed away the day before I left for San Francisco. And I hadn't even had time to grieve him. The year before I lost his brother, and dogs in our area, pets in our area, cancers, lymphomas. I mean, look how small they are, right? Yeah. So I see him on the screen, and I was numb over his loss. So I lost it over that. And the movies were so powerful. They really were. But I'll tell you, when you do something like this, and this crew is so well informed, and they've fully researched you before they do this film, what you're doing that I didn't realize is you're reliving your story in a compressed amount of time. So they came out, and by day 3, Friday of that week, that afternoon, we're doing this sit-down interview in my house, and they had some questions that they really wanted to get it, the humanistic side of it. And after that interview, we were all like, all of us, I just collapsed practically. They have tears in their eyes. The best stuff ends up on the floor, in editing. But I'm sitting there, and I realize at that point, in my work, I'm a trauma therapist, and I deal with complex, high conflict family and a lot of systemic stuff that's pretty tough. Just behavior and behavior 101 to me as a therapist, honestly, it bores me. There's plenty of people who can do that stuff. Let them do it. I want to do the tough stuff, and I always have. So I looked at them when they were breaking down their equipment, and I said, I've just realized something, that in the last few days, I've relived a trauma story in a very condensed fashion, and I'm recognizing that I'm flooded right now. And I said, but I know what to do. I called a very good friend of mine who's also a colleague of mine, and we went out and had a bite, and I just talked with her. The next day we had footage where I had a university professor and some students, grad students, come up and do some river testing and things like that we had done previous. But we aren't going to just do this for the sake of the camera. They're like, oh, we could fake this scene because we got to recapture your story. And I'm like, if they're going to come up here, we're going to do some real testing and find out what's going on right now with this place closed. And of course, very high levels still, right? And then Sunday, I invited everyone in our original group that had sat around my dining room table for 2 nights a week for quite a long period of time to come over and have a celebration, have some food and lift a glass and share this moment. So the film crew ate with us. They did some footage of everybody there. So part of it was we talked in the living room, which was almost to recreate some of our meetings. But we hadn't really seen all of us together since before COVID. There had been virtual meetings. Some people went on into commissions and different work, and some just, went on with their lives. So everybody sat down, and I think basically what I said to them is I brought out some documents from the beginning. I put them on the table and I said, let's just stop and remember this, what we did together, what we accomplished. I said, and I also have an apology to all of you. And they looked at me like, what? What's an apology? I think I took the film crew by surprise, but it just came out of me at that moment that I needed to apologize. I pulled out this chart that had these 5 columns. It was about air and soil and water, local engagement, state engagement, federal engagement. I said, I laid this on you in our second meeting. I said, and you guys all looked at me and you're like, we just want clean, safe water. It was just, I overwhelmed you. Yeah. I said, I made this really big while everyone was just trying to say we need to be protected, which wasn't going to get lost in that shuffle. But, I made your lives a lot more complicated. And I just realized that, the eyes were glazing over, in that meeting when I conceptualized this picture that was all of it. It was all levels at once. And we had great talent. And if we all kind of took a section and worked on it and came together as a whole, that to me was the way to go. That was too much for people, as it turned out. So I did all the parts myself. And burnt myself out. So.
Yeah. I mean, eventually you started to build a coalition.
Yes.
You had the Citizens for Clean Water.
Yes.
And you started to get people in office. And so a lot of what I see today is a lot of hopelessness. And some of it to me is clearly warranted. I mean, there are very dark and devious forces at play. And the light is also powerful. But what is intriguing to me is like, wait, I mean, every 24 months you can, send the entire House of Representatives home in the entire country. You can send a third-ish of the Senate home.
Yes.
Like every 24 months. I mean, that's a crazy system to adopt. Yes, that's been going on for, I guess, over 200 years. Now, everyone wasn't privy to it from the beginning, but over time...
money in politics, the lobbyists and the money who are way ahead of us sending these messages and assuring everybody. And if you were in office, you have all this stuff in office coming at you and everything that everybody wants, right? And all those things that, you thought you would get done by being in office. And at the same time... how are you going to get all the right information? So lobbyists come along to help you from the chemical industry and give you all this material. And it's just ever so convenient to believe it, right? So I think, I was brought up in Massachusetts and my father used to say to me, everybody in office is just a person and you're just a person. And remember that there are so many regular people out there. There are more of us than of them. So we have to make sure we tell them what we need. And, I grew up as a first-generation immigrant, and the late Senator Ted Kennedy was my senator in Massachusetts. He was a champion of the people. His door was open to you. So when you had problems, you could go and talk with him. You could access his staff. And, his door was open to you. So I already been brought up, taught by my father, like, oh, don't worry about this. We'll talk to Ted Kennedy, So I took that for granted. Massachusetts is a much bigger state than New Hampshire. And there are certainly bigger states out there. But I think there was that foundation of you can access people, they work for you. You know, both of my parents came here in the late 1950s. My mom from Glasgow, Scotland, and my father from the Middle East. And they believed in democracy and they believed in government working for the people. And I believe that too. So in New Hampshire, you know, I thought to myself, you know, for local representatives in town government, that's where it all goes wrong for a lot of communities. These are people with name tags, right? They're not chemists, they're not scientists, they're people with name tags. Where are they getting their information? Are they doing the due diligence and the deep dive in hundreds, probably thousands at this point, of hours of their own time, sitting there at 11:30 at night on an iPad reading autopsy studies from Denmark of where these chemicals are found in your organs? They're not. They're not doing that. So in order to educate people, you know, you have to do that. So let me take you back to 2016. After everybody was hearing each other and realizing that this water is a problem and we have neighborhoods full of sick people, we're not biologically related. And it wasn't even just close to the factory. It was on the other end of town. It was everywhere. So people are not stupid. They realize this. So what do people do when they're mad? They get angry, right? They emote. They shout all over social media. They go to town council meetings and they get angry. You need to do something about this. This is the town. And they say, well, you know, we're getting updates on the investigation, but that's not our job. They go to the water department screaming and yelling. What are you doing? You're serving us water and blah, 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 blah. And they say, we followed the law. You know, we're told right now that the other 4 wells are safe. And then you have people who are going to their state reps and making noise, and they're already got the industry playbook. Those reps that we had at that time, eight guys in their 70s who basically were saying these chemicals are not a problem. You know, 70 parts per trillion PFOA is 1 drop in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. These chemicals are even in the polar bear's blood, so they're not really a problem. They're everywhere. It isn't a Merrimack problem. And I'm thinking, these chemicals are in the blood of polar bears? How do you know that when you're not that well read? So they're using these talking points to minimize and to deflect and to basically say they're pretty much everywhere, and, you know, that's that. So I didn't accept that. But I also saw that petitions, you know, people sign petitions, right? People make donations, people have protests, hold up signs, make a lot of noise, talk to media. That's great. That's visibility. Now, what do you do when you stir up all that emotion? What are you going to do with that emotion? You know how many people burn out on emotion and they walk away, right? They can't take it anymore. We have people who made the most noise in the first year of this. They moved, they sold their houses and they left in disgust, a lot of them. So there were efforts that people made to come up with ways to organize. There was a guy who has a barn in town and he goes, oh, people can come on over here and use the barn. So they were, you know, sign holding and targeting with anger and emotion. So I'm watching this, and of course I signed petitions and talked to a lot of people, but I was tuning into how people were feeling at that point. And I was dialoguing with people that I didn't know, and I was seeing a lot of names on social media that I came to recognize. And I'd say, well, you know, how are you doing with all of this? So they'd go, can I give you a call? They give me a call, you know, and this started with people calling me or people testing their wells and saying, everybody tells me it's under 70 for PFOA, so I'm fine. And people said, ask her. So I'm going over somebody's house looking at well water results. What do I know at that point about well water results? So I look at this total and I said, well, your PFOA is 34 parts. I remember this one person. But look at this whole list. There's a whole list of PFAS here, and let's add them all up. We add them all up. It comes to, with mental math, about 181 parts per trillion. That's over 70. Is that okay with you? And they're like, no. So I didn't tell them, you know, your water isn't safe. But I basically said, is this okay with you? it wouldn't be okay with me, but I didn't say that to them. I said, is this okay? So I kind of guided them there, and I said, I know you don't want to now say how much is it going to cost to remediate my well, and I didn't need this expense. You shouldn't be paying for what you didn't cause. So that message was resounding with people. And what I realized is the town council and our reps were getting these weekly updates from the state. The updates were only what Saint-Gobain was agreeing to. So it was like, and it was nothing. It was nothing. So I caught wind of these updates. I asked somebody if I could see one or if they could present it at a town meeting, and they did. And I basically said, let me go and find the rest of the story. So I started looking at the GIS maps and where the testing was being plotted and making my own weekly updates. And every 2 weeks when the town council met, I was showing up at meetings. And in the beginning of this, I introduced myself and a colleague of mine and said, we're starting this citizen group because we're hearing from the state that we don't have information and people need information here. We are an EPA designated contamination investigation. This one guy lost it. He looked at me over his glasses. He shook his finger at me. He said, do not say the word contamination. It's inflammatory language. My colleague at that point is like shrinking and saying, I'm sorry, because this hate is coming at us. I don't know how I sailed through that. I actually do. I didn't think of it at the time. Everybody's like, how were you so cool? We watched that video. You were calm as can be. And I said to him, you know what? I said, I love this community. It is where I call home since 1985. I do not care for being an EPA designated contamination community in investigation, but nonetheless that is what it says on the DES site. I said, what are we going to do about it is why I'm here, and what are all the pieces that we need that we're not getting. Do you know the very next day the language was changed on the state website for information, and it said investigation in the presence of per and fluoroalkyl substances, because this guy didn't like the inflammatory language. So we're an EPA designated contaminated site, which means at that point, the EPA lets the state run the investigation, and the state gives updates to EPA Region 1. That's it. The EPA isn't really stepping in.
Yeah,
If the
they're not
state needed
involved.
some help, which they did in the Office of Research and Development after they were pushed by people for more answers, they did some stack testing, they consulted with them. They don't exist anymore, right? They were just canned. No more EPA Office of Research and Development. If that didn't exist back in 2016 to 2020 in particular, there are investigative pieces of data that we would not even have in this community. So even though we got it, it wasn't really told to the public. It was stored on this website that the state had that I figured out. It was beastly to learn how to, because it's not meant for the average person, but you can access it. New Hampshire was created like for the people, by the people government, which kind of makes it a hot mess the last few years because it's very misguided, but it also gives us the ability to access information at a higher level than most states. So that was a plus. So to me, this was about education. This was about how do you get state reps and town councilors and water commissioners and water utility operators to know the truth when they're getting the truth from leaders in the state or state senator who was a bold liar. He was in the pocket of industry. And that fall, 2016, Governor Sununu was elected and everything changed. Everything that was first started this investigation was discarded. Everything went behind closed doors into what they called a mediation process, but it was totally off the record. Everything went off record at that point. And he had the back of this polluter, sold us out. The consent decree is bogus, and the state knows it, and really protected them. But what I knew in that first year of protests, petitions, and attending meetings, that's not going to get the job done. You know, you need to build relationships with decision makers. And looking back a while later, I realized that I was switching my brain in those meetings. Conflict is coming right at me, which is a person, I don't like it. You know, in my own personal life when I was younger, if conflict just slammed me, I would get upset, I would cry. You know, I don't care for conflict. It really is feeling like weapons, you know, coming at me. But in my office, I deal with high conflict people. and high conflict, complex family. And maybe because there, I know I can make a difference and turn the conflict into something more healthy. So without realizing it, in those moments, my brain kind of switched from regular person, who I am in my personal life, to clinician. And something in my brain took over that was my clinical brain, which takes me as a person out of the equation. And now I am playing a role. And I didn't realize that for a few years. And one day, when somebody goes, how are you able to deal with everything coming at you? Fear monger, crazy lady. Those were the, family rated phrases that I was called. There were some real doozies there, and some where people said it where they didn't think anybody heard them. And my husband overheard a conversation once amongst a lot of people with impressive name tags on in our local area, and he was aghast. He said, I can't, it was so vile what they were saying about you. I can't even repeat it. I mean, and I looked at him, I said, I'm not surprised. And oh, well, nonetheless, the work will continue. So how do you look at those folks, right, that are part of the problem? And what happens in every town? What do people do? And they do it politically too. They fight, right? They protest, they hold signs, and they fight against the voice of what I will call is an abuser and an oppressor, because that is my language, as a social worker. That's absolutely what it is. You're suppressing people, you're repressing people, and it's absolutely horrible. But if you do that, you are going to burn yourself out. So there's a place for protests. We've had some good ones, but we did them with a specific ask for each one, and had letters that we were sending to Saint-Gobain asking for responses that were reasonable things. And the media loved it, and we were doing great with the media. So we did that. Did it change anything? Did we get any of those asks? We didn't. What needed to happen here, and what is a piece that people miss everywhere, is how to dialogue, how to build relationships, and how to say to yourself, instead of hating on all those 8 reps, I look at them and say, they're old guys who are dinosaurs. They failed to evolve. They get their information from their cronies, from who they represent. It's profits over people without a doubt. That's nothing new, right? When it happens in your community, it really brings it to the forefront over what that looks like and how it really impacts people. But they're self-defeating to the communities that they represent. They blocked bills that were put forth that were giving us exactly what we needed. Our own reps in Merrimack were blocking and amending and stopping legislation that we needed in our town. So I looked at this in a more compassionate way. And I looked at it as in, here are folks that don't have the right information. They believe the information they're being given. It's convenient to believe that, but they really do believe it. They're not up there lying because they're just bought off. They really believe, and this is how they operate. So I have to educate them. So people I knew that were friends of mine, and people, in the party that was going to bat, and I'm saying, I don't accept that this is partisan. The environment and environmental health cannot be partisan. So people were saying to me, how could you talk to him? How could you go and, call him? How could you have a coffee with that man? Do you know what he said about, these chemicals? And I said, I'm not betraying you. I'm educating people who are in need of the proper information. Our town council used to say to me, you don't have to come to these meetings and give us these data sheets and these updates. You could just email us or call us. And I said, I don't really mind, because if I come here and show you these things, if you have questions, you can ask me. And at this point, I'm capable of answering those questions, and I can back up everything I said, and I can bring you many, many, many allies who will be good assets to you, who have the right credentials after their names, and scientists in health and universities. So what they were really doing on camera is they were trying to get me off camera, because all those meetings are recorded, and people started listening and saying, I believe her. Something is wrong here. So I refused to make it partisan. I stayed only in messaging about the chemicals. I held coffee after coffee one-on-one with some of the folks, because I realized when they're kind of in a pack, they all have to stick together. But if you can get one person on their own and say, wow, this has been really stressful for you, how are you doing with all this? Nobody asks that of a person who's acting in a way that they're all angry with, right? They're just hating on them. But if you say, wow, there's a lot of stress in your life that you didn't count on over this investigation, then they start talking about how it's been for them. And I go, so where are you getting your information? I go, never mind. I know where you're getting your information. I said, and here's a packet I made for you, and here's the references, and here's who it is, and here's people that I'm bringing to the community to talk at some of my meetings. And bit by bit, I just kept giving them information. First, I said, I want to hear what they know, what they think they know, and I want to fill in the rest of the story. So that was something I did over and over and over. So I refused to see people as my enemy, even though their actions were harmful, and I wanted to all kinds of things, right? So
Yeah, of course.
I just said they need to learn. They need to learn. This is based on, it isn't just ignorance, it's based on this complacency, this cozy relationship with business and industry. And if you ask the business what's going on and they do a slideshow, I've seen a presentation by Saint-Gobain's environmental engineer privately with a small group that was off record, that was supposed to be on record, but they contained it and lied. And if you didn't know anything, you would think, oh, maybe this isn't such a bad problem. But
Right.
I watched these presentations and the hearings for the air permits and all these other things that are very technical. I'm comfortable with the technical at this point. I educated myself, and I can see what's missing. It isn't what they're presenting, it's what they're omitting. And if
Yeah.
that's a lie by omission, right?
100%.
That's a thing. I didn't make that up. So
No.
over and over and over, I viewed it as making the invisible visible. And every time they talked about PFOA, I'd rattle off PFHPA, PFBA, PFPPA. Yeah, there's 5 of them that are just as high as that. Are you telling us they're safe? So, the alphabet soup would just rattle out of my mouth at all these meetings. Don't just talk about, oh, it was PFOA, it's no longer used, and, they didn't know it was a problem, and now we know.
Yeah.
Not having it. So educating people and educating decision makers and building relationships and I kept until last year, I think, I kept my politics and politics fully out of it.
Yeah.
And last year, and then this year, my politics are showing because
Yeah.
they have to be. Because what I'm saying to people is, here's what's going on. The messaging from this EPA is crazy. The message from Kennedy and Department of Health and Human Services is crazy, right?
Yeah.
So that is an issue because there's a political party who's allowing this BS and lies to take place. To be healthy and safe, we need the truth, right? So now it's
100%.
political. But look, 9 years of keeping it nonpartisan, having members of both parties in my group. And I will tell you, at this point, there are some folks who were in office back then that aren't in office now. I have their respect. I'm on a first name basis with our water utility operators and my water department. In the beginning, they're like, oh, is she going to make trouble for us? We are besties. I have their back in all things, and they have mine. So there are people who split from some of my work and went underground, who, when more division started in this nation, there were people who they made some bad decisions, and I think they have to answer, to that. I don't have to answer to that, and I don't have to expose them. They've exposed themselves. So our state has stalled on policy. It has stalled in many, many ways. We were leading for a couple years there. We were leading the nation. But here's this polluter that is controlling the messaging, lying, minimizing, and not cleaning up their site, not providing blood tests to people, not stopping production, So we're remediating endpoints in water, whereas we're still polluting the environment. That's crazy. So from those stacks come air particulates that fall onto the ground and fall onto surface water, that soak into the soil, that get into groundwater, and there are very, very high levels of groundwater contamination on that site and soil contamination, and the waterways, for miles are forever contaminated. It's not naturally diluting. It ends up gradually in the ocean, and the ocean is in trouble because of PFAS, not just from this polluter. So, it just goes on and on and on. But relationships and education, that's the foundation of the work. The center cannot be just protest and demanding and anger. You can't demand if you don't have power, right? And you don't have power if you don't win over folks on both ends of the aisle and help them see that in the first Trump administration, an internal memo was leaked at some point where they realized that the National Coalition's persistence was a huge, quote, PR nightmare. And I laughed when I read that, So now they had to spin it. And what are they doing right now? They're spinning it, but they're not honestly solving the problem.
Yeah, and they've lost their trust. Like we talked about the mainstream media, the need for independent voices, and I think your story, and just to kind of try to condense that journey, it's a social worker who sees this huge problem environmentally, leverages those skills. Those skills come in handy. You have this conflict resolution skills that
conflict resolution and social workers, when I did my master's, I could have a master's in psychology. I was thinking about getting a PsyD and going up to the next level. But then I looked at the difference with an MSW because I go, maybe I should, think about all of this. And years ago, I realized in reading The Mission of a Social Worker, the code of ethics is me to a T. And this systemic person and environment model. Whereas if a person is in my office, it isn't just them. It's the community. It's what's surrounding them. It's everybody that they connect with. So the community is my client. The state is everybody, to me, is connected to everybody else. So it's very systemic. And it's also a model of, if you think about an ecosystem, how an ecosystem complements each other. If people and chemicals would get out of the way, it works beautifully, right? And people are part of that ecosystem, and or systems are also meant to be connected. We're very, very out of balance. So, part of my work is seeking balance. And when you seek wellness, you don't just say, what are your symptoms and what is the medication that treats those symptoms? That's not healing a person, right? Don't get me wrong. There are some people that, their symptoms are interfering with their functioning, that they do, need medication. But there are a lot of people who don't need medication, who can benefit from, other strategies and a more holistic, integrative approach that helps to heal. And in this journey, that's what's missing, right? How do we heal nature? How do we heal our environment and our planet? Not easy, but we have immense talent out there who could do it. If we could get those old dinosaurs who failed to evolve out of the way, those fossil fuel dudes, they need to just, the chemical industry, we have the wrong people running this nation. We really, really do. And they're even harming themselves, but they refuse to see it. And, and what's the other part of it, to heal? We can't just put money into downstream, right? We're not regulating upstream. That infuriates me. We've taken a huge step backwards in the last year.
Break that down a little more.
Yeah.
What do you mean with the upstream and downstream? What do you mean by that? And what are some examples that come to mind?
Well, downstream is the community, right? The end point is my tap, right? Everybody's tap. That's just with water only. If you are breathing air, look at the hazardous air warnings this year alone, right? For particulate and never mind just the wildfires. There's other things in our air, right? So we look at the heating of the planet, that's human behaviors. So all of that is the end points that are critical. What happens to our health when we're exposed to chemicals, a critical endpoint. So all of it is downstream. Landfills are downstream. Incinerators are downstream. What comes out of the incinerators is not good, So all of this is downstream. People are downstream. Upstream is the air stacks, the facilities, the military industry complex, all the manufacturers and all the contracts that go out that aren't saying, in order to have a contract from this government, we insist that you use safe chemicals. Do we have the talent to solve that problem? We sure do. We sure do. This nation at one point, not recently, in my opinion, but we were leading. The world looked to us for answers and innovation, right? We have the ability to do that. But you have concentrated wealth in the wrong hands. So if people are making money off of these chemicals that are really cheap for them to produce at this point, they're not giving up. They don't care about new technologies. They don't care about green energy, for goodness sakes, They care about the expensive, old energy, while they're trying to pretend if we just drill more, we're going to bring down the price. That won't work. It hasn't worked, and it will never work. So there are so many things wrong that if you look at upstream, when you look at who's at the top and you look at these facilities and ways to make them more green and environmental friendly, like if you're going to make something like fabric coating with textiles, with PTFE, and there's no law against that, you have the right to set up your business and make a profit and do what you want your lands. You shouldn't have a right to discharge through the sanitary sewer, site runoff, air stack emissions. You want to do that? Then prove before you do it that you're going to capture all those chemicals and safely dispose of them or break them down, and where are they going to go? That's what you have to do. With 94 billions in profit, not even gross sales, in 5 years, there is absolutely the money to do that. But this polluter in particular realized at some point that, this woman here, with safe water or not, is never going to shut up. That was part of the problem for them too. And our water department did something extraordinary for New Hampshire, where we have no state income tax and we have no sales tax. We're a lean state. So a lot goes on to property tax, and they look at that as local control. But a lot of things that are expensive, people vote no for. In order to do big projects, you have to get 60% or 2/3 of the vote. Very, very hard to get that when you ask people to pay money. Some would like to pay, but they can't afford it. So we petitioned all the voters in Merrimack a few years back to remediate all of our public wells, all 6 of them, not just the 2 that were closed that Saint-Gobain did not fully pay for, they contributed for, and as of next month, they no longer pay for the operating and maintenance. That means the medium that's changed every 8 months is on our dime for the rest of our lives and the rest of our children's lives, and maybe just on and on and on. So we proposed an initiative by draft warrant article to all the voters in Merrimack. Now, this was back when there was plenty of naysayers that they were hearing their elected officials tell them, this isn't a problem, this lady is crazy. So put this forward to the voters, right? And it said, we're going to filter all public wells to non-detect. We do not want PFAS in our water. Not just PFOA to under 70 parts, or New Hampshire maximum contaminant levels is 5 years ago is 12 parts, because we got those laws also done in the state. 93% of the voters voted on their dime to filter all the wells. That is unheard of in probably most places, but it is unheard of in Merrimack. You don't get 93% on any vote. It's either things fail by just a teeny bit and things that need funded don't get funded, or they pass barely, but not that 2/3. I'm talking about just over the 50.5%. It's between 49 and 51% is where the vote spread is historically for many, many things. So for 93% people to vote to spend, at that point, $15.8 million to remediate the 4 other wells on their dime, that is insane. And the goal is for the water department to sue to recoup that money. Some of it, they did receive some grants from federal dollars, but the lawsuits continue, and Saint-Gobain definitely has deeper pockets than our small water department, no doubt about it. But,
Wow.
we shouldn't be paying for what we didn't cause. But
100%.
93% showed me that that was not political, that the majority of our community at that point in 2019 believed that these chemicals are harmful at even small doses and none of them belong in our water. So we were the first anywhere that I've heard of system to filter to non-detect, and we still are, because New Hampshire state law says you can have 12 parts per trillion PFOA, and they don't even look at the other ones that come right after PFOA. It's a
Yeah.
few other ones that are old ones. And, I have a second home in Maine at this point. And in Maine, they have the sum total of 6 PFAS cannot exceed 20 parts per trillion. So if PFOA is the lead one, and it's 15 parts per trillion, which it is in the water in this area, it means that it's legal in Maine, but it wouldn't be safe in New Hampshire. I mean, that's crazy, because Maine is far ahead of New Hampshire in environmental regulations and PFAS regulations, but the federal standard of 4 parts is the equalizer, and the federal government health advisory says no amount of PFOA or PFOS in drinking water is safe, 0. So that's really validating, right? It really is
100%,
validating.
yeah.
It took that many years to feel validated by people who have the right credentials after that name, who agree with what I said from day one. Bad
Yeah.
news. And it isn't about just one of them, it's about all of them. So,
And you're saying, so, you saw all these adverse health effects, the town came together and
yes.
all these, people have these different issues that they see in the world, and they're dealing with essentially the same force of this
Yes.
mafia style,
Yes.
aggressor, this
Right.
abuser, this,
Yes.
whatever framing you use to sort of put these people in, and the sort of playbook they have and the pockets they have, they just put it on repeat and they get their way in a lot of different spaces, but not here, because it wasn't, the playbook on the other side, I think. And you started to elicit and talk about some of that.
Yes.
And some of it comes from the social work, and some
Yes.
some of it just comes from natural compassion. And to understand, you step back and you finally see that there's a mountain here and you got to climb it, or you see this
Absolutely.
dragon that you got to slay, whatever analogy you want to use, right? You
Yes.
see this problem that you must solve, and you don't have the playbook to solve it. You see a bunch of
Right.
bad dudes across from you, and you got to move 100 yards to get a touchdown, and you don't have a playbook.
Absolutely.
How you gonna
Or they
score a
run the other
touchdown
way.
without a
They
playbook?
can run the other way, or they can, there was people, they came up to microphones in meetings. This one man stood up there in his suit and the same haircut as all his other buddies, they all look the same. And he said, I chair the Science and Technology Committee, and I can assure this community I have seen no evidence of harm, from this chemical, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I come up
yeah.
to the microphone, I raise my hand, and I'm going up there like, raw, really fast. And I
Yeah.
start rattling. I said, first of all, no disrespect meant to you. You have a name tag. You chair a committee. You are not a scientist.
Yeah, that's a good
Wherever your
start.
information is coming from, it's misguided. And let me tell you who will tell you. So I start rattling off. Linda Birnbaum was head of the National Toxicology Program at that point. Philip Grandjean, Harvard University. So I rattle off names and where they're
Yeah.
from. I rattle off studies, and I just go, bleh, and it's going way too fast for anybody to even listen, right? Because I
Right.
looked at that video earlier this year, because I was looking at it with the video production with Goldman, and I went, oh my God. So people are sitting there and you watch them. And now looking at that video, and I never look at these videos, never, because I'm like, I don't want to listen to me. I see the eyes going like this, to me, to him, to me, to him. And then I see them looking at him like, eh. So they're trying to figure out who's telling the truth here, right?
That's right. That's right.
I'm going like, bleh! They can't even understand what I'm saying, and all these acronyms that are not people friendly at all. And somehow they determine that I have cred and he doesn't. Now they had a political problem. They lost 3 seats to 3 women from our group who
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah.
So, so we didn't sit there and strategize and say, some of us need to run for office, and some of
Yeah, how
us
did
need
that
to
work?
take.
I'm curious of how that.
So
Yeah, we
as,
didn't even talk about how
yeah,
basically members
there's,
of your group started to run
right.
for state office. Came into the water department, et cetera. Maybe you
Yes.
can. Yeah.
Yeah, it was organic. And and if I
Okay.
look back, I realize when I'm facilitating this group, I'm not there saying, here's what we're going to do this week. here's your marching orders, you do this, you do this. I'm facilitating what's going to happen, and a good facilitator and a good therapist is facilitating. So when you work with a family, you're bending some branches, but you're not breaking them, and you're kind of weaving and coming around, and you're lifting, and you're eliciting something out of people that they don't know is there. Right? And we all have the ability to do better. So I watch this process, and it kind of organically happens that people say, we need to educate Concord, and maybe we can better do that by running for office. Wow, that's a great idea. One person says that. Well, you know what? I think you would be really good at this too. Oh, no, my family needs me. I said, you would be like the best politician. You could get up there and make these. And she laughed. And, so it just kind of happened. One of the dads in the group has a background in small system water design, right? And it even fields in just very small. He works out of Massachusetts. He has his own business. He's a civil engineer. He came out of UNH, and his son went there too. So it's pretty cool. And he goes, they need. It's those guys who are thinking, well, I drank the water all my life, and I don't think I'm that bad. And you're looking at them, and you're thinking, dude, you do not look healthy.
You're not
do
that
you never
good.
Go to the doctor? And over the next year, 2 of those water commissioners lost their wives to kidney and bladder and breast. One had bladder cancer and breast cancer. One had kidney cancer. And,
Wow.
and I think over time they came to realize, and then one died of cancer after he retired he was voted out. One of the state reps. I mean, it's just the losses. So while they were in denial in the beginning, but it just kind of organically happened. So 3 dads from our group become water commissioners. 3 women get elected. The most conservative paper in New Hampshire, the Manchester Union Leader, the journalist comes out to interview us at this coffee shop. And she calls them the water warriors. So that label stuck. And you know what happened? Now we use it for many people. But the original 3, so the conservatives in town saw that they might, God forbid, you have 8 seats in Merrimack, that 3 of them were lost. You still have 5. To me, it should be 4 and 4. That would be fair, right? No matter what. Just split it up. And they were accusing their favorite newspaper of helping these women who were only in this for political gain. It was just kind of funny. They ran out of blue ballots in that primary, which is unheard of in my town, unheard of. And it was crazy. So then the other side decided, we better convince the public that we're working on this too, because we need those seats back. Do you really need 8 seats? That doesn't.
Who is they? Like who is they that need 8 seats? What do you mean? Like was
so
there a singular
New Hampshire
group?
has this New Hampshire's legislative body is second only to DC. We have 422 people in our legislative body for this little state. So we have 24 state senators, 5 executive counselors, and the rest are House of Representatives. So we have 8 representatives that go to the House of Representatives from New Hampshire. That's at a state level. Federally, we have 2 House reps and 2 senators, which makes sense, right? But in state, so think about this. If you're going to have 8 reps. Your state senate
is really huge.
But if you have 8 reps from a town like Merrimack, if we had 4, if we cut that all in half, the New Hampshire House, we would actually have better quality reps. We get some in there that are just in there, they get swept along in their party ticket. They run as a team and they tell everybody all the things they want to hear, and they don't do any of it. They don't sponsor and co-sponsor the bills. But if you try to bring that up, people say, oh, don't be mean, work together. So like the Democrats aren't allowed to point out the deception in campaign time because it's a bad look and you guys are so nasty, right? But the Republicans can play dirty all they want. So, the hypocrisy is crazy. And my town exemplifies what we see going on in the nation. And it's the controlling of the messaging. And people, I love people, but I get so disappointed when I really believe if people given the truth and the right information, they will do the right thing. But where are they getting their information from? People are not doing their due diligence. They are not educating themselves. So we can't say you don't get to vote unless you're an educated voter, right? We don't get to do that. I mean, they're knocking out all kinds of other reasons not to vote, which is
That's right.
terrible. But it's just like, you can become a parent if you're not fit to become a parent.
That's
The
right.
state may have their eyes on you, but there's no law against that. So, people as voters are not that informed. They vote
Yeah.
when polls come up right now, like we look at our senator races for next year, the polls tend to lean towards name recognizability, right? And when you say to somebody, why are you voting for that candidate? What really do you like about them, right? Some people can answer that question, but a lot
Very few.
can't.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Some
mean, our
people
reading
wait until
level
the
is
day
like,
of election and they haven't made up their mind. Because we have a huge amount of people in New Hampshire that we can register as independents. We don't have to be a Democrat or Republican. But then when you choose a primary ballot, you have to choose one or the other. Then you have to switch back to independent when you leave the room, or now you'll be in that party. In the general election, vote for whoever you want. So we have a long legacy of people voting for the person, not the party. And it used to be that you look someone in the eye, you'd have a town hall style meeting, you'd ask them the tough questions, and they needed to answer those questions, and they earned your vote. Now
Yeah.
we see one party that's doing listening sessions in New Hampshire. The other party is only messaging and not doing listening sessions, only closed door for their own party, not to the public at large. They're not engaging. And it's just wrong, Get up
Totally.
there and tell us what you're about and what you're gonna do and how you're gonna pay for it, right? That's how we
Yeah.
should know. And then people will make up their mind. So they're threatened within their party to follow, the party playbook or else. Way too much money, right? We know that, way too much money in politics. And there's a lot of people who are dead bodies in the New Hampshire House. They're there to vote with their party and they don't do a thing. Some of them don't show up in their committees. They don't do anything until things are coming to the floor for a vote, and then they get in there and just vote with their party. That's it.
Go with the
That's
wind.
not a
Yeah. They
rep,
just,
you know?
yeah, that's not real.
No, it's
not a
not.
real-
And they
it's not a real
forget
thing.
that they represent our town, not their party. And we are their constituents. Whether I voted for a rep or not, I say, you are my elected representation. All of you are.
Yeah.
And I send them information all the time. And
Yeah.
I'm always, continuing to keep them up on the federal lawsuits and all kinds of other stuff. So they're more informed because in New Hampshire, in that huge legislative body, there are crazy amounts of bills that are just a waste of time, and that takes a lot of bandwidth because they have to give them all attention in their committees. It's a very cumbersome process. So it was back in the day, where you could look someone in the eye and have a handshake deal and believe them and trust them. It worked, right? Same thing with
Yeah.
businesses. So New Hampshire is very anti-regulatory because when we were completely an cultural, more farming and rural state, you would go and talk to somebody or say, hey, you know what? This is my farm and you're doing this in your factory and I don't appreciate that. So people would discuss it and they would come to an agreement and they would shake hands and they would do the right thing. Well, the business owners in New Hampshire, by and large, the large corporate is all been courted for out of state. They have no investment in our state. They have no investment in our country. Foreign corporations, a lot of them, and they're there because it is a business advantage state. You have low, next to none regulations. They defer to federal for permitting and so many other things,
Yeah,
and
'cause-
just make sure they do their paperwork and they know the federal is broken and they are hands off. They're not going to tell you what to do.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't believe Saint-Gobain is French.
Yes.
Right? And so here you have this French company who
That's right.
decided, okay, we're going to build this factory where like you say, okay, New Hampshire has lax laws. Let's go there.
Yes.
And then this French company is buying
Yes.
off the leadership in New Hampshire. And it's like,
Yeah.
now your wife is dying of the cancer that got brought here
know.
because,
I know.
what are you thinking here?
It's
And like,
crazy. It's
these,
crazy.
these people are so far. Can't you see that these people have
They should
don't have
have,
your
but,
interest?
but people believe what they believe, right? If you believe, like our planning board and zoning board will say, well, it's their land, they got a right to do what they want to it. That hands off. Instead of
Yeah. Kind of sounds
this
like
is-
Texas, which is crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's that old mentality that people are there, that it all is about what you want to do. It's about rugged individualism.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. But this state, so there was a company in the 80s that opened here that ChemFab is what it was. And ChemFab started this, and Saint-Gobain acquired ChemFab in 2000. ChemFab
Okay.
created the Millennial Dome in London, that big white, ball of a tent that was their fabric. So it was patented to be fiberglass infused, very light, and coated in Teflon. The radome covers, the Denver Broncos Stadium, Denver Airport, satellite covers, all those things now. Saint-Gobain has done all of that. Wildfire fighting suits, many, many things. So Saint-Gobain, after messaging about French Corporation, a few years into this investigation, they changed their CEO, and then they spun off into the Saint-Gobain North America. And that was to silo and damage control. So ChemFab had a facility in Bennington, Vermont, Hoosick Falls, New York, and Merrimack, New Hampshire, all the same. Vermont shut them down in the late 90s. When Saint-Gobain came along, they said, you're going to filter your air stacks. So they had the ability to test then, and they had the ability to say these are a problem in the late 90s. And they said, if you make us do it, you're going to lose these jobs. And they said, we don't care about the jobs. And you know what they actually said on record is a great couple articles written about it. If you make us do that, we're going to pull out of here and take down the air stacks, and we're going to go to New Hampshire. New Hampshire won't make us do it. So they came to New Hampshire. They expanded this facility to 13 air stacks. It was half of that. And Bennington held their feet to the fire. They did Superfund designation, clean up under CERCLA, soil removal, clean water sources, medical monitoring, blood testing, all of it in Bennington, Vermont. Same polluter. Hoosick Falls, that's the They Poisoned the World book, is their story. Class action suit, CERCLA designation, hazardous substances, site cleanup, blood tests, health support, medical monitoring, and cash damages in the class action suit that they settled. Money isn't going to make people healthy again, but blood tests and medical monitoring, we don't have any of that here, any of that. New Hampshire has taken away our rights by elevating profits over people, big time.
100%. Yeah.
Big time.
And you see that nationwide. And so
Yes.
for people who are fighting back against that, having had the success you've had, having, the water warriors,
Yes.
you've had essentially, you like you said, you come from social work, you have this clinical experience, you fight against this huge corporation that's doing all of this pollution, and you start this coalition, not just the basic, okay, we're going to fight back, we're going to be angry, we're going to use our anger. Yeah, we're really mad that we're getting cancer here. We're really pissed, but we can't let the emotion get too crazy. Now we have to organize, we have to be smart, we have to be steady and patient. What is
Yes.
your advice now? I mean, you're a national champion. You're a Goldman Environmental Prize winner. You've fought successfully against these major forces. What is your advice for people who are frustrated with whatever version of profits over people that they're experiencing in the American landscape, and how they can start to fight back against it?
Well, you have to look at this holistically. You have to look at it on a local, state, and federal level. You have to kind of analyze it and reach out for other people who are in your same situation. If it's PFAS, reach out to people in the coalition. If it's some other contaminant, people reach out to me all the time, and I will listen. Tell me, and they go, well, what do you think about this? I go, never mind what I think. Tell me your story. Tell me what you did. Tell me what you've done. Tell me where you're stuck, and I will listen to that. And I will try to consult and advise you. You have to learn who does what, right? You got to make the right ask to the right person. You have to understand, does your state regulatory body have the power? New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, not protection, doesn't. They can't act independently. The governor's policy is number one. You have to engage with the governor. You have to engage with your federal delegation, and you have to know what the House does and what the Senate does and what these committees and subcommittees are. That stuff, back in history class years ago, when they got into that stuff, back in the day, they do a much better job teaching history since my kids, went to school. For me, it was so boring. It would be blah, 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 blah. So there comes a day where I was first meeting with Senator Shaheen's staff, and I said to myself, all right, so I know what I want, but some of it is state. Some of it is what can this senator do other than just listen to me and say, oh, this is terrible? How do I know what does a senator do? So I started looking it up, and I found out that she was a senior member of the Arms Committee. So I knew the Department of Defense contracts and procuring and specs were under her domain. So I go, all right, I'm going to give her the general what she doesn't know, because she's only getting that briefing that's so minimized, right? Give her the rest of the story, give her some data highlighted from the site investigation that nobody gets, and speak to what her role is and what she can do. So the right asks have to go to the right people. When Congressman Pappas came along, he was sworn in and he was setting up his Manchester office. 3 days later, I was up there with 3 other people I brought with me to meet him, bring him a packet of the investigation. He didn't even have his cards printed yet, right? It was great. He was a quick study. He cared about this. He knew as much of it as he could, but he learned a lot more. And then for him, I said, so to me, what I need you to do as a congressional is you need to look at this issue of loopholes and exemptions. Because if we put these laws in place, there's trickery. There's this thing I learned called CBI, confidential business information. So Saint-Gobain could be using whatever chemical they're using there, lying about it, and all they have to say is, we don't have to give you the truth because it's confidential business information. And if we tell you what's really in our PTFE mixture in the dip pan, that would allow someone else
competitor,
to make
blah, blah, blah.
and then they could compete with us. So CBI.
Special mixture. We can't.
Then we have
secret
these.
ingredient.
So in the Biden administration, they started passing these, like, we're going to make this list of PFAS, and it has to be, companies have to report what they're using, what they're making or using. I see the list and I go, oh, geez, this is a problem. So up I go to Pappas's office, and Shaheen and Hassan are senators. And I said, okay, this looks like a step forward, right? And they're all proud of it. They're like, yep, this is great. Now we're going to get this data within a year. And I said, this is going to be useless to Merrimack and New Hampshire. And they said, how can that be? This is a good bill. This is a good thing that we've done here. And I said, well, let's look at the list. It has not everyone, but all kinds of PFAS, 190 of them or something, listed individually by acronym, PFHXS, PFOA, PFBS, on and on and on, HPFODA. And they're like, yeah. I said, well, Saint-Gobain doesn't get these chemicals individually and mix them all together and make PTFE. They get PTFE from Chemours in North Carolina. They get it already, is their trade secret, custom ordered by their R&D department formulation. I said, PTFE isn't on the list, so they don't have to report anything. And neither does any other corporation in this whole nation who's using that or anything made by Chemours, which comes under the PTFE category. None of them. I said, and that's what industry has pivoted to from 2015 on. So they're like, oh. I said, so you got to get rid of, you got to do a better job here. You got to do total organic fluorines. That will tell you exactly if PFAS is there. You got to do things like these de minimis exemptions. I'm like, I'd hear about these things. I go, what the heck is that? So first I have to learn what it is so I could go and have the conversation with either the senator or the House, depending on which one it made sense to have that conversation with, and inform the other one that I had that conversation, and basically say, if you say you can get up to 100 pounds a year of this stuff, individually into your facility, you don't have to report it. That makes no sense because our data says this is the poundage that was used through the years and this is the damage it caused. And they'd go, oh, we see the problem. And then I go, okay, take it from there, go back to DC, we're good. So it was these constant conversations about implementation, right? And I know
Yeah.
from my background in social policy in graduate school, I had some phenomenal instructors there. I was very taken by what they call the macro part of social work, which is policy. And I know that policy is only as good as its implementation. So
Yeah.
here there was all these loopholes, exemptions that everybody thought that they solved the problem, but if you apply it to a case study, and this polluter was still chugging away at that point, right? And I'd say, let's
Just
apply
moving.
that new law to mine. The EPA under Michael Reagan, when he came along, I was so happy because he was at the DEQ
When was
in
that?
North
When was Michael
Carolina.
Reagan?
Michael Reagan was Biden's EPA administrator. He was with the Department of Environmental Quality in North Carolina. So he had worked years with Chemours, the maker of all our poison right now, who's a spinoff from DuPont in North Carolina. So I know.
That's the enemy number one there, Chemours.
Yes. So on he comes, he's sworn in, and I go, this is gonna. So by now, this has become like this big game of chess, right? So I'm kind of, it's horrible, but I'm also having fun with it because my brain is enjoying the strategy. So I heard that he's really big on personal relationships from the people in North Carolina in our coalition, and really big on communities and meeting with communities. And he was very accessible when he worked there. So he's still the same guy. He's just EPA admin. So I don't get intimidated by that. So at that point, X was then Twitter. And Twitter, you could have a lot of fun tagging people, writing things. It doesn't work the same anymore, but at that point it was a good vehicle. So I start tagging him. Oh, congratulations. I know of you from Clean Cape Fear, Emily Donovan, all your friends in North Carolina speak highly of you, blah, 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 blah. So then I said, so did you know what was made there is used here? So I put a little screenshot of a tag from what was arriving in this facility with their return address that a worker had kind of snuck me. But what do I do with this? The media wouldn't touch it around here. I can put it on Twitter though, right? So I said, you need to come to Merrimack and talk with us to see where this poison goes and what happens when it's used here. So he reaches out to my congressionals, and he basically is like, who is this lady, tagging me on Twitter? And they told me this, so I know it's true. And they're like, what? She did? Oh, yeah, you need to come to New Hampshire. So, okay. So we set up this big outside round table outside because it was still a couple years into COVID, outside of our water where wells 7 and 8 are, outside with the water department, the town manager, the congressionals, the EPA administrator, the Bedford town manager, Litchfield, a couple other towns, and me right in the middle of it all. And we have a conversation. We all tell him, and everybody is just doing the general town manager, whatever. Then I'm looking there and I go, okay, I said, I know what you know. I said, you're going to now know what I know. So I rattle off the details of it that the rest of the people are like, what is she talking about? And then I go, and Emily Donovan, I said, tells me that you're a really good guy. I said, and he stops. He smiles when I said her name and he goes, she keeps me straight. I said, well, now you have me standing right beside, because what's made there is used here. And Emily and I are very connected on this issue. I said, so, and he laughed. He laughed when he said, she keeps me straight. And I said, well, so will I. So welcome to another woman that you know her and the work there. So he came to our community and personally heard the water departments, what they were doing. He knew they didn't even have to do that at that point, but they said, this is non-negotiable. And our governor at that time, Chris Sununu, was saying things to the media like, the EPA's federal MCLs are unattainable, unrealistic, and unaffordable. Those were the 3 uns he used. I'll never forget that.
What a minimum.
The federal standards for PFOA and PFOS and the other 5 that they brought into it for 4 parts
So it's
and
like
stuff.
these federal standards, these federal guidelines,
So
they can't be obtained.
But here he is in New Hampshire. He says it's unaffordable, unattainable, and unrealistic. And I'm like reading this and I'm cursing up a storm. And I'm going, A, it is attainable. We're doing it here in Merrimack. B, it is affordable. My water bill isn't that bad. And C, it is realistic. And not only is it that, it's non-negotiable. And you are a governor and you're that out of touch. Boy, I bet your water is filtered up in your, expensive ski country. His family owns a lot of the North Country in New Hampshire and
wow.
Bad players.
Yeah, I mean, and what are the downstream costs of the insurance providers for all the things that are happening to people in the town? And
we have to pay these
talk about
high-priced
affordability.
environmental attorneys, right? We have to pay the attorneys from the water department lots of money and engineers to consult and everything else.
Oh my
and
goodness.
the granulated activated carbon in those big tanks in the very beginning was going about 13 months before a change out, and now it's running 8 months. And that's kind of interesting why it's not lasting as long.
So, I mean, within all of that, so we got a little bit of the taste of the playbook that we might employ against the, profits over people dilemma that we see across our nation here in the, first quarter of the 21st century, going into the second quarter of the 21st century, has been there forever. But here's a modern playbook on how to get it. You have to know the game, know the players, understand, who can do what and which people to ask the right questions to, right? Be compassionate, be a teacher, understand their perspective and be sympathetic.
Educate the people and educate them both. And you have to reach across the aisle. And right now, you can see this in the last 8 years. It's become increasingly more difficult to sit down with someone whose party and what they voted for is beyond offensive. It's infuriates me. And New Hampshire is replicating all this social, agenda that's just despicable. It's despicable and it infuriates me. So you have to put aside that you feel like you hate this person because of the bills that they're sponsoring that are so harmful to any person who isn't like them, right? And you have to be able to sit down person to person and then you got to watch yourself. Like, I don't have the luxury of going off on them on social media like everybody else in my town can, right? That people can say whatever they want about reps who are voting for really misguided policy that's really harmful to people, and people are angry about all these things, all the rights that are being taken away, understandably so. And I have to say, I got to be careful what I say if I want that person to sit down with me, and if I want to give them an update, or if I want to say, hey, I need you to come to this meeting. When I held meetings with New Hampshire legislators and I invited both sides of the aisle, all the people who represented people who were impacted by this, both sides, by then I could talk to both sides, but the sides weren't talking to each other. So this is what I'm hearing from the Republicans. Well, who's going exactly? Well, I don't know. How's the format? Well, is media going to be there? Because they were worried about me hijacking them and making them look bad. So I give them my word. I go, this is what it's going to be. I said, it's going to be you hearing what people need and why, and you answering questions about what you see and what we can do, and just as a community. And then the Democrats are like, oh my God, you're talking to him? I said, well, he's the House Majority Leader and he's from Merrimack. So yeah, I am talking to him. Oh, do you know what he did in this bill? And you know what he says about me, and he hates me? And I say, I know, but guess what? I'm putting all that aside. This is about PFAS. And if you're not going to be there, the public is going to go, why are you missing? And then I'd say the same thing to the other side, that hating each other. And this one woman.
Sounds like some more family mediation there at play.
So I said, if you don't show up, people are going to wonder why your seat is empty, because I'm putting a seat with your name tag in front of it, and you'll have to answer as to why you're missing. So I just basically did that. You're all welcome, and if you don't show up, I can't make you show up, but maybe people are going to speak for you. So yeah, how do you get people in the room, right? Exactly that. And I watched where everybody sat and how they moved their seats, and it was so divided. And I'm sitting there going, this is kind of funny,
it's like
but in my mind from the beginning, the only way a community is going to win this battle is the step that they pass is you have to build an army of your community standing shoulder to shoulder. And if you are standing shoulder to shoulder with your, at then point was 100, when we started this, it was 100, a town council is supposedly nonpartisan, but everybody knew at that point, 7 of the 8 of them were staunch Republicans and 1 kept very quiet. We had to be standing shoulder to shoulder. The town council, the water utility, the conservation commission, state reps, that was the trickiest part, and residents all together. So everybody says everybody wants this. So whether the powers that be believe it really needs to be done or it's a PR nightmare, it is a PR nightmare, because when you have people standing together, you can't say no. You can't say no. And it can't be, us against them. And everybody wants to turn it into us against them, because then they just take their jabs and cheap shots, and they think when they call you a fearmonger and a crazy lady and other phrases that I won't even say on the air, they think you're going to react and get emotional, right? And now you're going to be totally on the defensive. And that's part of the tactics. Or you're going to wear people down and burn them out, and they're just going to move or give up and just say, I can't take this anymore. There are a lot of people in my town who have signed things, came to meetings in the beginning, who stay engaged and follow everything on social media that I post and often message me, but they won't come to meetings that are supposedly support from them under the CDC, under even the last administration, because they know they left meetings like that feeling horrible, that they didn't get what they need. I will give them resources that they need, but it's too much. It is, they're just opening up these raw wounds, and they're not whole. No one is whole. No one is whole in any of these communities, not even mine. Just because we filtered our water, the rest of everything is still contaminated. And people, you don't just stop your exposure and say, all right, I hope it wasn't that bad. We see this playing out of health conditions. We see neurodevelopmental at high levels. I hear this national discussion on autism lately, and it makes me want to scream. Autism and ADHD have been strongly linked to PFAS exposure. Everybody has it somewhere, and maybe they've been breathing it in from carpets and textiles and everything else for years, right? So if you look at neurodevelopmental and reproductive health disruptions, endocrine disruptors, hello, the most persistent of them. You want to make American healthy? Well, let's ban PFAS as a class. That would it's intersected
you heard
with
it here.
Right? I mean,
Heard it here, Robert.
Yeah, in climate,
Let's ban it as a class.
Ban it as a class. And what about climate change, right? We all worry about climate change. It's not a hoax, right? PFAS is a major contributor to ozone depletion. It has TFA, HF, all kinds of things, let alone what factories do just by making, any emissions whatsoever. There's benzene, toluene, lots of bad stuff goes along with it. It's crazy, it's all connected.
So there's, so we have these people now. We've kind of gotten this playbook a little, right? But then what about life? I'm sure you've heard that from people. You just mentioned people who couldn't even come to meetings. And then you have people on the other hand who think about running for office, but, my family needs me, or, I want to go on vacation, or I want to see a ball game, or, how did you balance it? Did you just choose it wasn't a balance that you wanted to have and it wasn't intriguing for you? I mean, you had a full-time job. Right. And you're doing clinical social work. Yes. And then here you are leading a revolution against a factory and against, people who are being oppressed by this pollution.
Yes.
Then you have a kids and so
yep.
Beyond,
my kids
now we
grown.
have the playbook.
Yep.
Now how do we figure out when we're going to play on the field?
2016, March 2016, my youngest turned 26. She had finished grad school. They were like, oh my God, a lot of things made sense. So I know people who have done this while their kids were much younger. But from what I've done, it was non-negotiable. The more I learned, the more outraged I realized, I was. And I think I was really running on adrenaline more than anything, because you're right. For years there in the beginning, nights, weekends, forget it. People, now I'm reading books again. I'm watching, something on HBO Max and something on Netflix, waiting for this to drop. And I'm just like, wow, like streaming didn't just happen, right? But every
No,
time
no.
I stream something now, I say, this is really luxurious. I haven't had the luxury of that for so many years where
Yeah.
people were reading. I'm like, yep, whatever. Because it was pick up a book, do something fun, or keep working on this. Nights, weekends, late at night, fly into DC for one day to talk to people there, working with the national every other year. We have a national conference. And people, how many people in my area contacted me, can I please, because they wanted to be heard. What did
Yeah.
I do? Did I make it whole for them? But what I did is I heard them. I realized in this, when you listen to somebody and they can tell their story and you validate them and they thank you, when they get off the phone, nothing really changed in their life. But it's like when a person comes into my office, I realize the first meeting, if they have a good connection and they picked up the phone, which is hard to do, and they made that appointment and they showed up for that appointment and they had an appointment, not just with me, but any good therapist relationship. And if at the end of that appointment, they feel good and they come back the next week, and I hear this so much through the years, and they say, wow, you know what? I feel better already. Well, you know what? The first session is for listening. I didn't do anything. I listened. But
Yeah.
validation and active listening, that is missing from people who were there to serve us, right? So I worked on developing a community playbook where they could respond better to communities with the CDC. Funny what they can't do for us, but they had money to do that. So there's a whole website about, responses to community. There's another website about stress and resiliency with environmental contamination that's all about PFAS, unless it's taken down. I think it's still there, but I don't know for sure. All of that stuff over how to tune into people. I worked on all that also. I had people in other states in the National PFAS Contamination Coalition. A couple of them pushed back way back then, and they said, oh, you can't go down that road with stress. I said, if we don't talk about the stress and the mental health aspects of this, that's really needed. And one
Yeah.
person said, well, if you talk about it, the powers that be are going to say, oh, your symptoms aren't because of PFAS, they're because you're really stressed. And I said, stress can manifest in your body in many ways, is in inflammation, but come on. I said,
Yeah.
we can say, yeah, it's both. And your point is, that's all you have to say to that. So I'm just not having it.
Yeah.
My husband, a number of years ago, one winter, he was home a month or so in the winter, and he'd say to me, you're going here, you're going there, I mean, geez, can't somebody else do that? And I just look at him and just, why bother saying anything, And then one winter he was home and he heard some kind of high power meeting with all kinds of state and all federal and whoever was on that Zoom, because everything went virtual when COVID came along. And he heard it. He was in the next room. And I finished up the meeting and I ran out the door to go to the next thing. And he said to me, that was incredible. I understand now why you need to do this. I don't know who could do what you just did. And I go, oh, how many years into this we are? Thanks. And I just left, Okay. In the beginning, we had a whole house system that he put in, and I told him we needed a reverse osmosis dedicated tap in the kitchen. So he can plumb, right? So this is
Yeah.
$200 more to sink in. And he goes, I don't think that's necessary. And I said, it is necessary. This system, look at the size of it. I did it. I connected it. I designed the plumbing in a whole different way. It's even better. It's optimized pre and post and blah, 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 and sediment. And I said, great. You have the best plumbing and the best skills. Wonderful. I said, what's the medium inside of that tank? Well, it's carbon. Where's the carbon come from? Well, is it coconut shell? Is it this? Is it that? He goes, how the hell should I know? I go, exactly. I said, it's only nationally certified to lower PFOA and PFOS below 70 parts per trillion. So it may work beautifully for a week, a month, a year. I said, but a year at the most, all this other stuff in the short chain, which we're all exposed to everywhere, that we're not even talking about nationally, is coming at us. Reverse osmosis is the only way we will have safe drinking water. Well, I really think this system, look at it, it's the tanks. Look, come on, you're trying to tell me that isn't going to take care of it? So I said, it's all about nanoparticles, and I rattled off some other stuff, and he was stubborn. So finally I ordered the system. It came, and he goes, oh, who do you think is going to put this in? And he has a lot of pride in what he can do, which is great New England pride. And I said, you made it clear that it's not going to be comfortable for you to get under the sink, maybe, is what this is about. I said, I'll call a local plumber. You're going to pay somebody to put this in? You know what they're going to charge you? And he said, yeah, they're going to charge me like a lot compared to this. And, I hope they don't mess with your great plumbing in the basement. Ugh. All right. You got me. I'll do it. Then we buy this place in Maine 5 years ago. I order one, and he goes, is this necessary? I said, it is. Do you want me to tell you why? And he goes, no, never mind. It's probably being delivered tomorrow. It is. He puts it all in. He plumbs it, also splits off to the fridge, so the ice and the fridge water are also filtered. And then he says, what do our daughters have in their homes? Make sure they both have one. So one did already, and one thought the fridge filter was adequate because their water department told her in Massachusetts her water was compliant and safe. And then I read the water report, and I said, it isn't. I said, it's compliant, but you need one of these. I don't want a hole drilled in my counter. I think she was in a little bit of denial. So
yeah. So I mean, speaking of that, I mean,
yes.
what are the top few things that a person who's very new to this doesn't understand PFAS, doesn't understand that these problems can be related to this huge issue that's going on? What are some of the simple things that ordinary people can do to protect themselves?
Yeah, because you can't wait. Part of this battle has been, we can't wait for people to come and save us. We got to save ourselves, right? 100%. At the end of the day, it's about your health. If you have your own home, if you rent a home, how are you going to alter the plumbing? If you can put in a reverse osmosis, Apex system is a great one, made in the U.S., stainless steel, very easy to maintain, in a good install. You can put that tank, that's the holding tank, in your basement underneath your cabinet if you can, or find a place to stick it. And there's a 3-part little thing that goes under it, $239. You can buy it from them. You can buy it on Amazon. Same product. If you can't do that, ideally you can plumb it, or you can find somebody to do it, or you got to pay a plumber, but it's well worth it. The plumbers in my areas were price gougers because of this. In other areas, should be more reasonable. And if you can't do that, the Culligan now has a zero pitcher, right? And that's the only pitcher, because zero water, whatever that other one is called, PUR and Brita's, they're not going to take out PFAS. And if they say they are, they won't. And maybe it'll be for 2 cupfuls, and it'll break through. It doesn't have the right medium in there. There's a Culligan pitcher. Hydrovive has a system where you can screw it on your taps directly, or you can put it right underneath your kitchen sink, your bathroom sink, if you're worried about your shower, depending on your water levels. You should have the test results now. Get those test results from your water utility. If you have a private well, get it tested, and then know where your water is coming from. And if it's high levels, I wouldn't want my pores opening and absorbing it in the shower, in the bath. So we have to figure this out. New Hampshire, we passed a program where we have a grant program where if your well tests above 4 parts, which is the federal standards, it'll be up to $5,000 to put in a whole house system, or up to $10,000 to connect to public water if it's in the area. Has to be in the area because the pipes are expensive to get it there. So that was based on federal dollars, and states have water trust funds where all these states now are starting to receive these massive settlements from 3M and DuPont, who made PFOA and PFOS originally. And those are all settlements based on your state's share. Where is that money going to go? It needs to be going to this. What do people need? They need their water taken care of in their home while they're waiting for the infrastructure and the remediation. But we need to stop polluters. You need to know what's going on. If you have manufacturers in your community, there's a friend of mine in Westfield, Mass, years ago, who was looking at the air training guard site is their contamination. I was down there and I said, well, you have some factories in the area. What do they do? I don't know. Well, go look them up. And one factory, she goes, no, nothing to do with PFAS. And one of them was a place that did food packaging. And I went, that is putting PFAS into your air. So I was ahead of the curve because I was reading so much. And you know what it was? It was my trauma. It was my sense of justice. With trauma, you become hypervigilant. I was in lock on focus mode, and I became like this walking encyclopedia of all things PFAS. And it was because it was so surreal that this was going on, yet no one was acknowledging it. And you look outside, and with any trauma, right? You look outside and you say, it's a beautiful day, and there's people walking down the street, and everything looks so great, but this horrible thing just happened, you know? So it's a dual reality. But my life did balance out in time, and this year has been a whirlwind, you know, with the Goldman Prize. But that gave me an opportunity to elevate this at a time where we need to elevate this, where you see rollbacks of water standards and rollbacks of regulations. We didn't even have enough to begin with, right? And what did I read a few months ago? You can be a foreign entity and come to the United States. If you pay something like $5 billion, you can set up business and they won't even ask for any environmental regulations at all. Come on. You know, where's all this money going that this government is raking in? It's like shaking down people, right, for money. And where is that money going? It isn't going to the right things.
Totally isn't.
And
No.
the right asks aren't being made. So, I mean,
Yeah,
I'll
maybe
be on this gig the
maybe
rest
that
of my
may-
life.
What's
know?
that?
I said, I think I will be on this gig the rest of my life. But at
Yeah.
this point, you know, cleanup of this site, you know, this should be a CERCLA federal Superfund site, which means there would be polluter accountability because the polluter would be ordered to clean it up. But every state gets to choose whether they request for a facility to be on that list. And this state is like, well, they've been cooperative. We have no cleanup plan. 2.5 years, they're putting out lame versions of cleanup plans. And months later, they say it's not adequate. And they submit the same plan with a little tweak that's still not adequate. You don't expect that anybody's going to do the right thing. You know, we need regulations, you know, to do that.
Yeah, and so, I mean, have you been able to start to identify how you can have some impact at the highest levels of government there in New Hampshire?
Well, we have a new governor, and she made a phrase last week about the 3M and DuPont first cash settlement, $8 million, which is a drop in the bucket.
Yep.
Compare that $8 million that New Hampshire's like, look what we did. Woo, we're going for polluter accountability. Well, they didn't pollute our state. Saint-Gobain did. You're not going after them, right? And they have tons of money. It's crazy because she's talking about polluter accountability, but she hasn't said anything about this whole site. She's just, you know, I am looking to get a meeting with her. We had budget season and a lot of contentious things going on for quite some time. And then I took a breather, but that's on my list to give a call and say, you know, I'd like to just sit down with you and hear what you know about this investigation and fill in the rest of the pieces and, you know, what people care about and what we really need, you know, from you. A Republican governor maybe has some sway with Lee Zeldin and the EPA administration, maybe not, right? But they can at least say, hey, this isn't good for us and we don't like this. Those are the only people that might be heard. So looking at, you know, my federal delegation at this point is all Democrats. They're already well informed and they're already fighting the good fight. They're in the minority, you know, but they can still show up and do their job every day. So people need to engage, though, with their federal delegations, their congressionals, especially a lot of people in Republican states who care about environmental things think there's no point right now. There's more of a point in a Republican state than there ever has been, because if people realize that people are raising their voices and your representatives locally and state and federally hear this, they care about it because they want to get reelected, you know? So get them on record and have town hall meetings and invite them to it and talk about what people want. Because at the end of
Yeah.
the day, everybody wants to be safe. And I went, the last time I was in DC, whatever that was, a couple years ago probably, I went into Congressman Pappas's office with a few other people from the coalition, and I introduced them to Linda Robles from the south side of Tucson, Arizona, and an amazing, resilient Hispanic woman who got into this battle. Well, she's lost children. She has kids with lupus and kids who died, and oh my God, her area is, and she thought this was related to TCE, a horrible, chemical that was related to a lot of military contamination. Then she learned about the PFAS presence and about PFAS. And man, she is something else. She is phenomenal. So I wanted her to come and meet him. And I said, I always talk about my friends in other states. And I always say to you, you aren't just representing me in New Hampshire. You are representing every single person in every single state who may not have adequate representation. I said, and this is Linda, and everything you've done for Linda. And then they spoke for a while, and I just let her take the floor because she is, the poster child of everything that's wrong. And now, what do we have? Government who eradicated the phrase environmental justice, right? So, and she is amazing. And I was so proud to introduce, he has been a leader in PFAS from the day he took office. I was so proud to be able to introduce him to Linda and say, he is my representative, but he's working for you too. That was what we need from government, right? We need them to say, at the end of the day, if we're not healthy, our nation is not healthy.
100%. And so, anything you're looking forward to on the horizon, anything you want to shout out, and make people more aware of while we have this time we still have in the platform?
Sure.
Yeah, just what's on your mind?
Well, I think people need to, a lot of people are checked out right now. People need to check in and say, at least on this issue in particular, let their electeds know where they stand on this issue. Talk to their water utilities, talk to their states and say, we deserve to have this regulated. We don't want these rollbacks. We want this to go further. These chemicals don't belong in our water, in our soil, in our air, in our bodies. They need to go. Innovation,
Yeah.
green chemistry, we could do this if the will was there to do this. So people have purchasing power. They can know what's in their products. They can ask questions. They can demand from where they buy things and say, I don't want this, because of this, but if you change it, I'll come back to you, purchasing
Yes.
power. So there's a lot of things people can do. People can look up the National PFAS Contamination Coalition. They can join it. There's a page on there, there's a lot of
Yeah.
federal work right now that has to be done. So my focus in the state is on site cleanup and general environmental things that are all related to this. On a federal level, it's really much about the EPA right now. It's a
Yeah.
travesty. The Environmental Protection Agency, if you look them up and you read their mission and their messaging like, we're doing all these great things. And if you just want to believe that and not do your own research, great. What good is that? But if you really, people need to listen. They need to see beyond which side of the street you're on, and they have
Yeah.
to say, what do you have to say? All right, let me just hear it with an open mind instead of dismissing because they already have their information. So everybody can, learn how to have conversations with each other again. That's really important. That's definitely a lesson that came out of this to a lot of people that realized that the best way for them to govern is to govern and listen and be educated. So it's a ever evolving target, and the planetary concerns right now are immense. We have somebody in charge of the nation that is going to disregard all that.
Totally.
Whether he thinks it's true or he doesn't care or he's beholden to, the big money, which is the chemical foundations. The people in office are all conflict of interest that he's appointed. On and on and on it goes.
Yeah. And you said that you were
somewhat more optimistic than most because you had came up in a time where you
Yes,
had such
absolutely.
horrible, odds
Right.
essentially because of the
That's
kind
right.
of people that were in place, and you saw the progress, and the
Absolutely.
progress is what continues to give you hope.
Engagement. So engagement isn't just about action work net petitions, sharing on social media, because what you see there is like-minded people now are sharing the same media sources, right? If I get things in my inbox and I don't want to stay in that silo because that's what it is. And you're just, so if we affirm and validate each other, we've already done that, right? We have
Yeah.
enough people that will validate that we know. Everybody who's on the right side of certain issues believes it. And if you're on the opposing side, you believe you're on the right side of the issues. But what we have to do is talk to people beyond the same old people. It doesn't really do much good. How do you educate and have conversations and do the did you know? I've talked to a lot of people about fishing. We have no signage in our rivers with fish advisories. I wondered about that in the beginning, if I could talk about catch and release versus consuming fish from all our waterways without getting pushback from people who have lived here for generations, who take that as this is what I do. Don't tell me it's a problem. I eat the fish and I'm fine. There are some people who aren't fine who think that's just their bad luck, you know. But so I tentatively checked around that issue just to feel it out, and I found that I could give that advice, and I say, hey, enjoy your fishing and have a great day with you and your kid and whatever. But did you know? Did you know that all these waterways, did you know that fish flesh is a really good filter for the river and it uptakes PFAS, so it'll be at higher concentrations than in the water? Stuff like that, just a did you know? And that's me. Why do I care about that, right? I could say, you want to go fishing and drink, or you want to drink water that you think is safe and you want to go fishing and eat those fish just to say, haha, I'm still alive. I didn't drop dead after eating this fish. There are people who go, good, fine, sooner or
Yep.
later it'll get you. But to me, that's not okay, but I'm not going to lecture them and
Yeah.
give them all the science and all of that. They don't want to hear that. I'm just going to go, did you know? That's it, you know?
Yeah.
So the fact is there. So you have to engage in areas where you wouldn't want to engage at times. You have to go to anything you can in your town and start these conversations with people as a community. That's really important. Instead of like, who's with us, who's against us, right? Because not
Yeah.
only is that really intentional that we're being played, it also makes a lot of money. If people bring their emotions into it, right? They're like, ha, I challenge, my kids are, great in their 30s, and every now and then some big hot issue comes up and they're like, oh, I just donated to this and I just gave that. And I go, that's great. They go, well, if you want to give to this, here's the link. And I go, nope. And they go, what do you mean? I go, what are you doing? My daughter goes, what do you mean, what am I doing? I said, what are you doing? I said, if you give money to something that you like the sound of and they've been around for forever and a day, ask yourself, what did they accomplish? It's important. I'm not saying none of these places are, doing squat, but you have
Yeah.
to focus on the doing. I
That's
said,
right.
I gave her an example this July, and she looked at
Okay.
me like, what? And then later that night she goes, oh, that was pretty good. There was a
Okay.
tree. There was a tree that was improperly planted in one of my neighbors' yards here in Maine, and they didn't realize it. And I see this tree being watered, watered, watered. Now we're in a massive heat wave, right? And it's a dogwood tree. And dogwoods are grown in the South and shipped up to New England. And I'm going, what is with this tree? And I said, this tree is planted too high. It has stuff heaped around it and it's running off. I don't think the water's getting to that tree. My son-in-law, my oldest daughter's husband, is an arborist. He said, there's more to it than that, but you have the right idea. I go, well, what else is going on with this tree? He said, I think it was planted in the cage in the burlap. I go, what? Why would they do that? So I'm lowering the dirt around the tree, pulling off all this crud that they put on top of it, shouldn't be there, to get it down to where it should be, to put in something better, make a pool and put a slow hose on it. My neighbor's not around. But I said to her, your tree is not doing well and the irrigation isn't working. So he comes over with his shovel from across the street from my garage and he starts digging out the tree. My daughter, his wife, arrives in the doorway and she goes, what are you guys doing? This day is a Sunday morning. It's 94 degrees and really humid. I'm sweating. I got mud all over me. I have bare feet. He at least had the proper footwear on. He starts digging. He's sweaty. And she's like, oh, I thought we were leaving for the beach. And I just look at her and I go, and so I said to him something like, oh, geez. I said, I'd like to think I didn't raise a princess, but maybe I did. He just smiles. He loves her to death. And then she goes, hello, what are you doing? You're filthy. And I go ahead and take my car. It has the parking pass. Go ahead. We'll meet you there, or he will, or whatever. Then she goes, well, why do you have to do that? He pulls the whole tree out. It's in the cage. It's in the burlap. And then he takes it all out of the burlap and he starts, I go, what are you doing? He goes, these trees come from South Carolina. I go, I knew they came from the South. He goes, and they're growing in this farm. This is all clay. Before you plant a tree like this, and this is professionally done. She paid $1,000 for this tree to be planted. Break up all the soil, free the roots, redig the hole, get it all properly planted, soak it with water. He goes, and then later on, if you want to go grab a bag of compost, we'll put that on there too. I go, you got it. So she's in a little bit of snit. So we're about set. So I look over and I see her face. It was a little pouty, right? And I just said, and I just look at her and I go, there I am, in this decent neighborhood, right? People are probably looking out their windows, filthy and sweaty. And I go, a lot of people sign petitions to save the trees and donate to the Arborist Foundation and the Sierra Club. Hey, I donate to the Sierra Club. This is saving a tree. Get it? So I'm there in bare feet, and then she just goes, what? And I walk across the street. I go, the phrase grassroots. Is this not the poster child of what it means? It's doing. It's not signing and staying clean. It's dirty. It's messy. It's inconvenient. And that's all I'm saying. I said, that exemplifies the last decade. And it just came to me. And she's looking at me like, all right, whatever. So somebody dropped her at the beach. He went to the beach. I was too tired to go to the beach. After we did that, I go, I'm sitting on my deck. Maybe I'll go to the pool. But you know what I mean? I'm in the 100%. Trenches. I'm muddy. I'm gross in this beautiful neighborhood where the landscaper was paid to do this. And I'm like, no, this tree is going to die. So.
Wow. I mean, that says it all. I mean, that really sums up the work that you wanted to do, getting in the trenches. And just I think, it really sums that.
Isn't it? I like that. So about a week later, I go, that image, I wish I had that on film. I could make a short video clip if I knew how to do that, but I really don't. So, but that just captures what this looks like, right? And people are so removed from it. They really are. They can be educated. They can understand it intellectually. But what is the connection to the earth? Do people put their feet on the earth and farm and plant and tend to their own land? Or are they too busy and they hire somebody to cut their grass, trim their bushes? Me, I don't know. Maybe I'm a first generation immigrant. Maybe I'm still there, where I'm really connected to real and dig in and do the work. But
are you optimistic of the generation to dig in and do the work?
I send that message there, but I thought I was so good later because I want to go down the beach later and say to her, so when you did that really stunned me because you were feet in the mud last I knew. Now you live in the Boston area and you've been there for how long? And dang, wow, really? But I go, it just took her by surprise. I didn't go there, but I worried about that. I worried about people being too busy where you have dual, parents, working households, going, great people. There's so many great people I know, 30s, 40s, they're going. How do you simplify? How do you say, what do I really need versus what I want? Can I be happy with a little bit less and slow it down a little? Then you're going to hear the birds. Then you're going to notice if there's something different in the air that shouldn't be like that. And you're going to go, what's going on here, But if you're going, you're not going to see it. You're not going to hear it. You're going to vote. But you're probably going to vote for the party that you most identify with and not really think about the issues, right? So I think that's a problem. That's a problem for everyone to stay really in touch with the earth in reality. And that sounds like I'm an original tree hugger, but I mean, I grabbed a copy of Silent Springs at a raffle. No, it was what was it? It was like a rummage sale when I was like 12 years old. There was a raffle going on, but this was a beat up
Yeah.
book, and I bought it for either 5 cents or 25 cents. I just remembered I had a couple coins and not much there because everything was cheap because it was back in the day. And I bought it because I looked at the cover and I go, whoa, that looks like a great book. And I read it when I was 12 and I was like, oh my God, and being out in the woods, it just really, really shaped me to
Yeah.
all of this. I credit that book, but I also was
Yeah. What's
outside
the
of.
crux of that book? I'm not familiar.
Yeah.
Is it,
It
it's a
really is
classic?
about, things in the waterways that are coming in there from chemicals like DDT and things like that. They were altering amphibians and altering, of all things, the reproductive organs. So as a scientist there, to understand the impact of what goes into waterways, even wetlands and things, and if your fish and aquatic creatures and frogs and reptiles are changing and morphing, you have a problem,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. We're all biological. It's going to go
Yes.
downstream eventually,
Yeah,
right? And so,
absolutely.
I mean, and I saw that
And that
from the
is
film,
credited
you
with,
know.
yeah, and that was credited with the beginning of the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and the birth of the EPA. That was it. That was all after that book and other people. And I remember, in the early 70s when the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act was created, and feeling so proud and living in Massachusetts and seeing the cleanup of Boston Harbor and other waterways that were really in bad. The Charles River was a toxic stew at that point. New England, was like the manufacturing capital of the nation, with putting factories on waterways in particular. So to think that things could still happen, in the 2000s that should have been taken care of back in the 70s, and that there's
Yeah.
people out there still fighting to get rid of those laws that they never believed in the first place. We've seen this before. We saw it under and around the early 2000s under Bush. He didn't really care about environmental protections. It was all about profits over people and bad players and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and I saw an example of that abuse in one of the stories you mentioned, where the individual who worked at the facility thought they were getting a break because they were
Yes.
going to pay for their kid. They had
Oh, that was horrible, wasn't
kidney
it?
disease.
Yeah.
They had
Workers that I've
cancer.
spoken to. And all these, the most troubling conversations with people who had to be careful if they were talking to me, where they took place? Very late at night on Facebook Messenger. Go figure. That's where, and under an anonymous name, where they would have a profile and they would talk. Then there was a couple people trying to engage that I didn't. My instinct said, "You're pretending to be somebody, but you're fishing around to see what I'm saying." And in those cases, I was very cryptic. But yeah, and saying, "Oh, we work for such a great company. They gave me dialysis in my home." We are totally off record, and now that's
Yeah, a
horrible.
person gets kidney cancer,
I know.
and they, the Saint, the company,
Yeah.
Saint-Gobain, essentially says, "Oh, we have you covered. We're your
That's right.
friends.
That's
Don't
right.
go to
Kidney
your
cancer.
insurance provider. We'll cover
Yeah.
everything, and we'll
Yep.
and we'll actually provide it for you in your home,
In-home
and we'll keep it really
dialysis.
hush hush." I mean,
Yeah,
it's
isn't that?
so,
And you
you
wonder
know,
where else that's going on, right? That
yeah,
can't
it's
be the only one. And
so
and here's the
vile.
thing with kidneys and kidney cancer, it took years. It's the strongest finding with PFOA, and Dartmouth University worked with their state finally to redo the cancer incident data that wasn't analyzed properly, and I knew it wasn't, but that was that. And they did it, and it was 68% higher statistically for kidney cancer. So highly statistical significant in this town. That and
Yeah,
that's and the workers, where do they live? They're gone now, but worker protections. Your company is lying to you, and how many people were harmed handling these chemicals without goggles, without proper,
100%.
clothing? I mean, that's not okay. That's
And they
not okay.
knew exactly what they were doing. There's a
Low
story of
pay floor
the
workers.
pot
At that
people,
point, we started
you
this.
know.
A floor worker
Mhm.
said to me, well, I need a job with really good health insurance, making at least, get this, $13 an hour. That's what this one guy said to me back in like 2018. And I go, $13 an hour? That's so wages went up since then, thankfully, but still,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
what
That's
people were willing to
crazy. And
sacrifice.
I know this, that there's so many people that are out there every day working as hard as they can to make ends meet. And they know that maybe they look around their families and they go, oh, my family history has this, 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 so they think it's bad luck and genetics. Well, do you know 94% of cancers at a minimal, 94% are environmentally caused, not attributed. That's not, so genetics might mean you all grew up, in the
Similar
same
environments.
place.
Yeah, yeah. You
So
guys are
it's
all working for the
environmental.
factory
So we have
generation after
victims.
generation.
Yeah. So we have people all over this nation who either think it's their lot in life, that's how life's going to go for them, or, bad luck, or they blame themselves. Well, I did smoke and I don't eat so healthy. Well, you know what? That's part of what you can do, but that's not all of it. That's not all of it. It's what are you exposed to in many, many workplaces.
Wow. And so I think you know, you look back and you say, I'm no Lois Gibbs.
No, I don't.
And
I'm
I
just a
think
person, and
I
I
think some
still feel
people
there's so much
will
more I wish I could have done.
yeah.
Driving them out, yes, and I know I did that. I know I did that because they said, "Oh, we restructured." Yeah, well, there was this article that came out before that decision, after they were given an air permit for 5 years. A week later, their announcement comes out. But tied to that was this immense article with this amazing journalist who was based in New York, who wrote for France. And the French are environmentalists and big shareholders. She didn't hold back. She didn't worry about them suing her like so many other people did. She told the full story. So there was a piece of it there, and the EPA at that point was paying some visits to them because I was saying to the EPA, this investigation is all about PFOA, but Gen X and HPFODA, which you guys know well, they're using that and they're not following the guidelines for use. And the state would pretend, oh, that's just for the makers of, not the users of. Would you like a copy of the consent decree, why it was approved in 2009, which was a long time ago? No. So
Yeah.
many, many pieces to this. And they thought that whether we paid for it or they paid for it, once private wells were paid for, that everybody can remediate, that they didn't take care of. That's on taxpayer dollars, not on them. The
Yeah.
MVD, public water, filtered, they counted on, because this is what happens in normal places. If you want your water to be safe, once your water is safe, you get on with life. Right? That's what
Yeah.
the average person does. So they counted on people would just move on. They never counted on the persistence of every aspect of this being problematic.
Yeah. They didn't they weren't ready for that part of the equation.
No, no.
Yeah. And
And the
that
job, the job isn't done, and the job wasn't done then. And, locally a lot has been accomplished, in the state a lot has been accomplished, but we have a whole nation at risk.
yeah. And so the fight continues on. And
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 the,
and
and the
so
state is a
yeah.
god awful mess with we haven't even touched agricultural and farm impacts in New Hampshire. They're very reluctant to go there because they're like,
Yeah.
ooh, if we go there, we impede someone's ability to make a living. Not if you don't do this properly and support them and take
Yeah.
care of what they need.
Especially if it causes other people to die. I mean, how can you make a living when you
It's the
have
food
all
chain
these?
too.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's all in the environment, and so
absolutely.
there you go. And so I mean, kidney cancer is probably the number one. What are the other biggest impacts that come from PFAS?
Reproductive health disruptions, neurodevelopmental disruptions, neurological, thyroid disorders, thyroid cancers, pancreatic, breast cancer, testicular cancer, ovarian, endometrial cancer, heart conditions because of the lipids, liver enzymes are problematic. Your elimination organs are all at risk because your body can't eliminate it, doesn't know what to do. But just something like cholesterol, and it isn't just dietary, it's PFAS binds to various proteins which get messed up in the liver, fatty liver syndrome. I hate that label. It just sounds like you're calling everybody a fatty, right? But non-alcoholic, liver disorders. The ability to metabolize alcohol is compromised. The parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, your endocrine and immune system, immune responses to vaccines are not adequate. They even said, the government said, the CDC said when COVID came along, that we brought this up as a coalition. If there's a reduced immune response to vaccines, what happens to our communities with COVID vaccines? They said, yeah, you're right. You probably need an extra one beyond the first two right then. But it never was brought into public health. So that's just what I can think of off the top of my head. Every system in your body is going to be impacted because it's in every organ and in your blood of all Americans at different levels. And, where's the focus on healing and what we can do to get this out of our body and boost up our functioning?
And how are these different from microplastics?
Microplastics are in your body, and you know what? From a marketing perspective, from media, what I like about microplastics is visual, right? You see this little pile of teeny little plastic things sitting there and go, this is in your heart, this is in your body, and everybody goes, oh my God, right? So PFAS, what do we have for pictures? So microplastics are full of PFAS. They're all fluoropolymers, and everybody wants to pretend that fluoropolymers are the answer. They're trying to define the definition of PFAS, that it doesn't include that chemical equation. That's ridiculous. There they are, impacting everything. So they are kind of one and the same, other than what's going on with that is there a slight granular, we look at that and we say, ouch, right? So, but we don't really feel them in us. But visually, you have a picture there with the microplastics. I always think, how do we get a picture for PFAS? A chemical chain photo or somebody's slide with kidney cancer? That's not engaging people. That's not getting attention.
How do you tell them that there's Teflon in their bloodstream or whatever?
That's right.
I mean,
that's right. It's invisible.
The Teflon part is really, I think, easy to grasp. It's like, okay, you have Teflon.
And what happens to your body?
Micro Teflon essentially inside of you in different systems that you can't get rid of.
That's right. And it binds to albumin and all kinds of things.
It combines with other stuff.
The chemistry in your body is atypical. You're going to respond to things differently. It's not okay. And anything that's water repellent and grease repellent, what does that do inside of your body in itself? So what's it doing? Blood cells. A lot of people with lymphoma and lymphedema and various bloodborne cancers, ALL, ACL, ALC, those ones, they're very much there. They don't talk about pediatric cancers at all in PFAS. They don't count them. And we see it. We see it all around our area. And on and on and on. Just the impact of blood. Then the impact of backyard chickens and eggs. Egg yolks are egg yolks, right? Everybody goes, watch out for the yolks. They are high in cholesterol. Then they say lately, oh, that's not that bad. Well, we don't talk about the egg white. If you're cholesterol conscious, you may eat egg whites and not egg yolks. Egg whites are full of PFAS because PFAS binds with albumin, and egg whites are made of albumin. I never knew what albumin was a decade ago.
I still don't know.
It's a thing. It's a thing, right? So it's like algebra, X and Y. What do they stand for? It doesn't matter. It's a thing.
Right.
So there's something, so just call it egg yolk, right? So egg yolk, egg white. Everybody knows what egg white looks like. That is albumin. PFAS is binding with it. So you are getting more of a higher share from eggs, from chicken, from so many things that are free-ranging in particular. I used to buy free-range eggs when this all started, and then my husband had to learn the new thing. I'm like, no. He goes, now we buy the plain carton eggs? Why? And I said, because the issue was chickens being cooped up with chemicals and things like that, so the free-range chicken and cage-free. I said, they're pecking at farmland that's been treated with biosolids, and as the worms come up, after rain, the chicken wants to eat the worm, right? He's like, yeah, in addition to the feed. I said, well, the worms are protein, and the worms are totally PFAS from the ground. Bad news. So back to plain cartoned eggs, no more cage-free, free-range eggs. That's a silly thing.
Yeah,
Sounds silly.
has there been any interventions as we come here on, 2025 with AI and all the hype of the crazy, and we can do, not only in textiles, right,
Yes.
with, creating new different types of textures, like
Yes.
that science has already gone pretty crazy. And then on the flip side of something like, taking carbon out of the air, that kind
Right.
of, nanoscience to
Yes.
sort of,
Yes.
vacuum this thing up at the, right. Has there been anything on either side of that, or any nation, it's kind of a two-part question,
Making
or any
progress? Yes.
nation that has, been successful in producing mass products that don't possess all of this stuff?
There's turnout gear now that's available that's fluorine free. That's how we have to look at it. Not fluoride, fluorine, because total organic fluorines is going to be from PFAS. There's firefighting foam that's fluorine free, made in Canada. Now, think about this. In the United States, if you have whoever makes it, Tyco or Dakin or Solvay or something like that, they have these immense contracts with fire departments alone all across the nation, in every town and every city, right? And then they have all the military contracts. I can't even imagine how much money they rake in from all of that. They don't want to give up that money. So
Unfortunately.
just like the cookware, instead of pivoting to new technologies, they're going to decrease their profits. These chemicals are really cheap to produce. They have a massive profit margin. You can find solutions. Under the Biden administration, one of the things they did that was great is they did these innovation grants for PFAS, for destruction technology, for product, for shifting the market. So all these brilliant people out there could get these grants to bring to market solutions. That all went away. So when you talk about the clawback of funds in research and design, it goes on and on and on. And a big part of that is the solutions. So I think the playbook right now is keep the solutions in the hands of, like here we had DuPont, right? A maker of PFAS, a big polluter in North Carolina. They spin off and they name that facility Chemours. They are putting in all kinds of permits right now to make more and more and more PFAS and to expand their capability. They already do an insane amount, and it's all going to be rubber stamped. Well, DuPont then went on to start working with Culligan and buying up GAC, which is granulated activated carbon, and creating systems so they can profit on technology that filters the stuff out of the water because they understand the chemistry. So they were ahead on that. So they're the ones designing some of these systems and making profits on what they caused. That's a head game. So that is the issue with concentrated wealth in this nation, right?
100%.
We have
Yeah.
the same entities that are campaigning to keep money in their hands. They're very tight with a certain political party right now, and they have been always, and other politicians, I'm sure, and they don't want to give up, their profits at all. So they court every senator, all of them, and it's absolutely despicable. So innovation is being, pushed back and suppressed in this administration. Just like, we can't just say drill, baby, drill. I love coal. Coal is beautiful. What a dumb thing he said 8 years ago about coal, He thinks that people in West Virginia are simple and they don't know that caused cancers and black lung and all kinds of things. Mining is dangerous. And there's a lot of pain involved and a lot of painkillers and other medications. But those were the only jobs once upon a time. So he really thinks that he's going to buy a vote by going, see, you guys are doing a great job. Keep doing it. It's not the way to go. He's steering us to energy that is the most expensive and steering us away from what's not only sustainable, healthy, but less expensive. The same thing in chemical policy, right? You're keeping the profits in the hands of the same people, and the fossil fuel and petrochemical folks are very tight with the PFAS. It's all together. They're very invested in this also. So the American Chemistry Council, they have some bad players. They're within the EPA right now. So complete conflict of interest. That's not ethical. It shouldn't be legal. So we're in big trouble, and I don't know, how much we can do to expose all of that, but that shouldn't be okay with anyone.
Yeah. No. So you see a lot of innovations, but you also see so many blockers to actually
Right.
get to those innovations.
all these, interests who are put together. Now, do you, what are those different, do you see those technologies in other places, in other countries? Is Switzerland doing a great job on it or something like this, or Sweden or
Germany is starting to do some work on this issue because they like to engineer things. And it sounds like some of these other nations are not as beholden, right? I don't know enough I know the structure of their governments in general, but what impact does these big money, we are capitalism on crack right now. We really are. It's just this capitalistic, money in politics is out of control. The campaign finance laws that were looked at in the 90s were abandoned, along with, semi-assault rifle 10-year ban. That expired. That was that. So many things that were trying to happen in the 90s, were just really, really pushed back on. And, we're letting the wrong people run the country. And the cronyism is just absolutely horrible. And now we have these insane culture wars going on, and they hit upon something about human nature. You can rile people up with hate and all the isms. And you know what that is? That's a red herring. That's horrible, but that's a diversion. It's absolutely horrific, but that's diverting from the other stuff that's going on at the same time while it's horrible unto itself. So it's just, and he's the perfect front man for all this. He can create drama, controversy, this president, wherever he goes, but he's like Teflon. Nothing sticks to him. He doesn't even feel it. He doesn't lose any sleep over anything other than if somebody makes him look bad and then he wants to sue them or, indict them or whatever he wants to do. That's it. So he's the biggest diversion of all. But who is really running the nation, after the Citizens United fiasco, however many years ago that was, giving corporations, rights like individuals. Other nations are doing things like rights-based ordinances for nature, where the river, the Goldman winner in Peru, absolutely, she was a lovely woman. I mean, I just think of that story and I want to cry, and you see those visions there of oil pumping in and fish and things gasping and that. And to then argue, can you imagine in the United States of America, right? So Peru is little, but in any state, let alone the nation at all, that you go to the powers that be and you lay out your case to the courts and you say, the river has rights because we believe in this country that when you pass, your soul is reabsorbed by the river. And all our ancestors are there and we must honor them. And we must honor the river for what it gives us. Life, food, sustenance, for everything. Not just us, animals, all of it. Not to mention that waterways are immense carbon absorbers, right? So they're actually helping with global warming. So they make this argument and all the powers that be in Peru say, okay, you got it. The river has rights just like a person. And zing, the oil people have to take out their pipes and clean it all up. And all the animals run free and swim with health.
Yeah.
Because you can clean that up easier than PFAS, I guess, and other visions of rivers and waterways. They're stunningly beautiful. And when you look at this rights-based, nature-based rights, can you imagine in this country you get laughed? I thought about doing rights-based ordinances years ago. We would have to pass an ordinance on a town level in order to do that. And there were attorneys out there who said they would defend it and felt that, when you're sued and yada, yada, yada. But at that point, I thought, that would be a diversion for what I'm trying to do here, which is based on what language do I use to talk to New Englanders the way they think, find out how they think, get the relationship and guide them to doing the right thing. That would be too pie in the sky for them. I would lose credibility if I did that, and I want to do that. Yeah. And maybe moving forward, if I find people to do that with in this country, what do I have to lose at this point, right?
Yeah, nothing.
I've gone as far as I can locally.
You've done and
now I can say whatever I want, because if they decide they don't like me now because of the way I think, that they still know, what was done was the right thing to do. So I'm kind of free right now.
You are.
I am. And when you talk about rivers and carbon, we talk about oceans. And have you heard this about the bleaching of the coral reefs and how problematic that is, how they're dying?
Very slightly.
So we heard that a couple years ago, and I remember just hearing it and going, "Oh my God, that's horrible." And then I moved on with the day. Then I heard from someone, and then I started talking about PFAS in water waste to some scientist who then turned around and said to me, "Well, have you heard about the coral reefs?" And I said, "Yeah, PFAS bleaches coral reefs? Explain yourself. What is this?" What they told me, which I couldn't repeat because they were, I could understand it, but it was very scientific. But the gist of it is the water pulls in carbon, from the air, and then it does something to it and it holds it, which is helping stave off some of climate change. But in the water, something has to happen with nitrogen in this nitrogen exchange, and that's what's impacting the coral reefs. PFAS is getting in the way of what's supposed to naturally happen with nitrogen and a bunch of other stuff that I couldn't even account to you. But conceptually, I understood it, and that's what counts. But basically, it's disrupting the functioning of the ecosystem, the ocean, which is what's going on with the coral reefs. So I was so mad. I'm like, what? Everywhere you look, PFAS is in pesticides. PFAS is,
It's impacting our body's functioning abilities as well as the
fertilizers. People on golf courses, higher rate of, Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative diseases. Yes, pesticides are bad news. PFAS is a big part of that too. So crazy chemical stews that are going on. But, I keep finding it everywhere, and it's connected to everything. Plastics, climate change, everything. Trees, all of it.
Yeah. And so do you think there's something we haven't touched on that you want to talk about? And
we touched on plenty.
Yeah.
You're gonna have do with it what you will.
You're bionic. And I can see the motor
I don't think
that
I'm
you
easy.
have.
I honestly don't think I'm easy to edit, but give me a platform and I will take it, by golly. I appreciate it, right?
Listen,
There's
that's
a
why
lot I
long
have to
form
say.
is winning, because you don't have to edit it. You just let it out.
A
People,
person who never sought to be on the stage or anything like that. I'll tell you a funny thing about the
you
Goldman.
deserve it. It's really great.
When I hear that I'm going to be at the San Francisco Opera House, right, and giving this speech, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't even, right? So
you did great. It was such a great speech.
Then I found out in February that I had to write my acceptance speech, basically, and send in the draft for just to make sure, and so they would have it, and if there was any comments on it. And I go, oh no. And they're like, what? I go, I have testified here and done this and done that and talked to the Office of Budget and Management on their secret conversations and done all kinds of stuff. And when I start to prepare and write things out, it gets longer and longer and longer, as you can imagine, just based on this afternoon we had together. And then finally I just go, oh, and I crumple it all up. I throw it over my shoulder. And then I pick it up 10 minutes later and I go, I'm just going for it. So whatever in the context, like if they say at the OMB calls, you have 3 minutes to speak about this rule, go. I will speak specifically to that rule and use my 3 minutes so well. And people who are attorneys, environmental attorneys, say, can you please send me a copy of your comments? And I say, I don't have them. What do you mean?
Just was gone.
And I go, I knew what the question was going to be asked, and I knew what I want to say and how this affects people. And I go, oh, I surprised you because I was really focused. And then they laugh because they know me well. And I go, no. So Goldman people, I go, oh, I said, what I write now, what do I know how I'm going to feel in April? There's so many ways I could give that speech in the context of where I am in a moment like that really is important. What comes out is exactly what needs to come out. It always happens. It just happens. And I don't know how. I said, so I'm just so uncomfortable with, and I'm going to write and write and write, and it can only be this long. Oh my God, this is going to be another hard thing. So then I go, all right, I have to behave myself. This is non-negotiable. Then I toyed with the idea, I could just write something now and give it, and they'll go, that's cool if there's any grammatical things, because they didn't change my content. And Ilan was doing that, this media amazing man, and he said, this is a great first draft. I don't have much to change. And then I had to do, well, what are your calls to action talking points? I made a decision to make it national, not about me and my group because I had a big platform. So I made it broad. I figured the video and my page told the local story. I didn't want people to go, oh my God, that's wonderful. And it's my problem, not their problem.
Right,
So I
right,
used
right.
that platform
How
to talk
quaint.
about the we. And then even the day before, they're like, oh, you can come down and run the speech a couple times with us. And I'm like, I go, do you teleprompt it? And he goes, yes. And I go like this, oh, I'm glad I asked that. He goes, why? I go, no chance of going rogue. I won't. I go, so I don't want to memorize it. I want it to be real, but I want to be
Yeah.
talking to people and feel their energy, which then, helps me
Yeah.
with what they need. And then I'm going to do that. So I was like, oh, he's like, you got this. So it was so funny. And then I
It's so
set
crazy
myself
that
a deadline.
it gave you more stress to
I
not
came up here
have
to
it
Maine
prepared than
in
to
the
do it
winter.
like just like
Yeah.
off the top. You were just like,
I
just
had
let me
I
do it off
had
the
3
top. I'll
more
feel way
weeks,
better. I'll feel
right?
way better.
I had 3 more weeks to turn this thing in, and if I was late, they probably wouldn't care. And I said 3 weeks isn't going to help me. So I came up here, and one weekend that was going to be a snowstorm, came up to Maine. Luckily, there was power and internet, and said to myself, all right, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. The talking points were easy and what I wanted on the page. I just rattled that off and sent it. And then the speech, I go, how am I going to do this? So I pulled up next to the laptop, and I have terrible keyboarding skills. So I was like 2 fingers, making mistakes, swearing, back, da, da, da. So well, I pull up my iPad next to the laptop, and I opened up the iPad to last year's ceremony. And then it started, and then I just stopped it. And then I looked at it and I just said, think about what this is and who's going to be there and what do you want to say to these people? So I pretended I was there, and I wish I could do text to talk, but on the laptop to write, I don't know how to do that. And I said, what do you want to say? And I just said, this is what I want to say to people.
Yeah.
And projected myself there. And then I said, I'm going to send this by 6:00 because I had a meeting on Zoom at 6:00. And at like 5:59, I didn't even read it. I hit send, and that was that. And I didn't think about it until 2 days before the ceremony.
Did you just read it off the teleprompter? It was all there, and it felt like it felt.
I had to be true to my words. And then I was worried, when I read this now, is it still going to be what I want to say? And I read it. I go, yeah, this is what you did it. Whew.
Oh, that's good. Glad
It's hard.
Glad it all came together.
This isn't easy. I can laugh at myself and make light of it, but it's not easy.
You did well. You felt fantastic. And like I said, I was gonna say, you don't feel like Lois Gibbs, and I'm sure that future winners will not feel like Laurene Allen. You are one of a kind, and your work has been tremendous.
Thank you.
And so, it's a great template for other people coming behind you to understand not just how to make action within, the world of PFAS, but also how to make action everywhere that we see profits coming before people. And so, the blueprint you laid, the lifestyle you lived, the, getting in there, the real definition of grassroots. Just everything you've done, I think, as time goes on and you've been cemented, it's for great reason. I really see it now as we've had this amazing afternoon together, just talking through it and understanding your values and your character. And I'm really grateful for having had the conversation and for all the work you've done.
Thank you. It was wonderful meeting you. And you're doing a great job just lifting up these voices. And it gives hope to people, right?
Yeah.
And without hope, what do we have? We have nothing. We hear about persist. We're supposed to tough it out and persist. But you cannot persist if you don't have hope. And if you don't think you can make a difference, you're not going to do either. But you can. People can do this.
Laurene Allen, thank you so
Together,
much for being on
that's
National
the key. Not alone. Don't
Together.
do it alone.
Together.